Hey friends, hello, welcome. Let me just say the obvious. That loop that I designed is terrible for that intro. So I'll have to work on that because that was almost insufferable. I'm just saying it was very awkward. Luckily, that live part will get trimmed out in the final version of this video and for the podcast community so they don't have to hear it. It is so good to be with you. Welcome. I'm just warning you now. This is going to be an intense one. Now, I know over the past month, we've actually almost doubled our subscriber base, which is crazy on YouTube in particular. So if you're new, welcome. We do these lives as often as I can. They take a lot of work and it's hard to always get guests to find the time to do the research to come on, but I love bringing you credible people to respond to some of the craziness that we're seeing, especially from the world of Christian nationalism, and today is no exception. Few quick things. First off, if you want to help this broadcast get out there more into the YouTube land or maybe on Facebook, please smash that like button. And here's why. Here's why creators tell you to do it. It tells YouTube, oh, people like this. We'll keep pushing it out to other people. So it's a great way to help us get found, and it's an easy way for you to help us do that. It doesn't cost you $1. You just hit the like button and you're good to roll. If you are new, welcome to the New Evangelicals. We are a nonprofit organization. I'm the creator of the organization. My name is Tim Whitaker. We are committed to helping people find a better path forward in their faith, rooted in love, justice, and inclusivity. We help people navigate topics usually somewhere in the intersection or in the Venn diagram overlap of politics, theology, and culture. We're also committed to non-dehumanization. We help people explore the Christian tradition. We hold space for folks who have been marginalized by the church, and we try and hold the church accountable. And yes, this is live. Look, I can even do this. Watch. Whoa! It's your comment live in the video. How cool is that? So, okay, listen, I'm going to hop right into it. We have a great guest. He's been on the podcast before. I'm going to bring him in right now with my new technology. Boom! Dr. Kevin Carnahan. It's so good to see you. I'm a little fired up today. Maybe it's because I'm on my third cup of blueberry coffee. I don't know. It's just always good to see you. It's great to have you on the show. It's always a pleasure working with you. Thank you for making time.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Awesome. So we are going to get into this momentarily. I'm going to try and set the stage briefly. Now, Kevin, you have been on the podcast with me. This might be your fourth time. And whenever I see something that is batshit crazy in the world of Christian nationalism or some crazy pastor saying something absolutely nuts, I go, Kevin would be a great person to bring on to help dismantle this. We've responded to Mark Driscoll. We responded to, what was the pastor's name? Was it Ed Young Sr.? Yeah, and some other folks as well. And now we're going to respond to someone named Stephen Wolfe. We'll get into him in a minute. Why don't you just briefly, for our audience, there's a lot of new faces here, introduce yourself for them.
So I hope that you don't think of me just because you associate me with crazy. But so I am Kevin Carnahan. I'm a professor of philosophy and religion at Central Methodist University. I am the former co-editor of the Journal of the Society of Christian Ethics. I've written a couple of books. I've got another book coming out in April on Jesus, Christology, and gender, and the gender of Jesus. So I get around, and I guess I engage a lot of crazy stuff. I'm also on TikTok, where also I engage a lot of crazy stuff. So yes, I guess that might be why.
I recommend people following you on TikTok. You do some great content there. I love that. That's amazing. Also, friends, I do want to say, and I have not told Kevin this, any super chats that are sent in during this live will be split between me and Kevin to help compensate him for his time. It's something that we try and do, especially with our academic guests who put so much time and effort into the work that they do. And I know, Kevin, you put a lot of freaking work into this one. Oh, look who's here. Kip Davis says, I just watched this speech by Stephen Wolfe at New Christendom Press on Sunday, and it is one of the most racist tirades I've ever heard. Absolutely terrifying. I'm just saying, guys, when I title this stuff, I'm not exaggerating. Like, I'm not clickbaiting you. We really find the craziest stuff, and it's real. It's real. We're not exaggerating. So, so please, any super chats that get put in here go right to, they get split between the organization and Kevin, so make sure you do that. Kevin, someone asked for your TikTok handle. What is it?
It's just Kevin Carnahan 2 at TikTok.
Love that. All right.
And if you just put in Kevin Carnahan, you'll get me. So
Okay, fair enough. Here's what I think we should do. Let's just set the stage for what we're going to be going into, give a little bit of context. Essentially, there was an event that happened by an organization called New Christendom Press. Now, hopefully my new technology works. I have some new tech behind the scenes. Let's see if this will happen. Wait, hold on. That's the wrong button already. Wait, I got this. Boom. Okay, good start. And then, wait, I have to pull it up first. There it is. Oh, wrong thing. Darn, I'm getting there. Boom. Okay, here it is. Oh, Kevin, you're not in here. There's two of me. I can fix that. Okay, there we go. So this is New Christendom Press. They are building the New Christendom. Actually, Kevin, let me ask you a question, because I don't know. When people say New Christendom, what the heck are they actually talking about? Any idea?
So the idea of Christendom was that there was one unified Christian culture over Europe, the Holy Roman Empire, of course, which by the end, the joke was neither holy nor Roman. And it's this callback, which you see all the time, this kind of, well, we're going to see it again today, this kind of myth making about an idealized history that existed at some point in the past that they want to return to. They get to, in this scenario, play like knights and ladies. So that's,
Well, they do, because, I mean, look at their podcast here. Bright Hearth, Recovering the Lost Arts of Domesticity and the Productive Christian Household. We have The King's Hall, Making Self-Ruled Men Who Rule Well and Win the World. So there is very much a sense of conquer and conquest. It kind of gives the vibe, very patriarchal. I should have worn the Patriarchy is Poison t-shirt in protest. But this is who we're talking about. These people put on this event where someone named Stephen Wolfe, who I'll explain in a second, spoke at. And that's what led me to contacting Kevin to kind of say, we got to talk about this because it's absolutely crazy. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting looking at their website because I think you're right. The website is just patriarchy all over the place. The guy that we're going to watch is just kind of racism all over the place. So they're really covering, all their right-wing brand types here.
Yes. This is Stephen Wolfe, okay? Oh, by the way, thank you so much, Jonathan, for the super chat. I appreciate that. I got to fix this chat thing, too. Let's do this. Boop. Look at that. Okay, cool. So this is Stephen Wolfe. Now, Stephen Wolfe wrote a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism. That's important to know because oftentimes people will be like, oh, people who don't like Christian nationalism are smearing it. They're saying things that aren't true about it. This guy wrote a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism. Here's one of his quotes. My goal is to reinvigorate Christendom in the West. The question for most of my audience is, which way, Western man? The suicide of the West or its revitalization? Did I say that correctly? Hopefully I did.
Yeah.
Okay,
did.
Cool. So we're going to dive into what this all means. Stephen Wolfe, I first picked up on him when he kind of went viral. Thanks, honestly, pat myself on the back, to myself on Twitter. I'm going to share that clip now. He was in an interview talking about his book and some of his views. Here's what he said. And again, friends, he wrote the book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. Here we go.
For men, and it's saying what's going to prevent us from being Christian nationalists? Well, what's to bring it in a Christian nation that follows kind of principles of Christian nationalism. And I think one of it is going to be, I don't think it could happen when women are generally kind of in charge and rule things. And that's because women tend to have, they're very empathetic. Mm-hmm. They tend to be more inclusive, and men tend to be more exclusive, and they tend to, so there's these different traits that you see between the sexes, and in order to have a Christian nation where where blasphemy is punished by someone who seems well-meaning and nice and smiles big, you're going to have a guy who says, no, you're going to jail. Right. I mean, or whatever it is that you're fined them. I mean, because I'm all for blasphemy laws, by the way. If you're going to suppress atheism, I mean, there might be some very nice guy who has a big smile, loves atheism. Like, no, atheism's crushed. Mm-hmm.
There you go. So again, we're not exaggerating when we say Christian nationalists are not for pluralism. They want atheism crushed. They want blasphemy laws put in our society. It's not an exaggeration. That's a small glimpse of who Stephen Wolfe is. He spoke at this event, New Christendom. He gave about an hour-long talk. Now, Kevin, you put a lot of work into going through it and kind of picking out about 30 minutes worth of clips that we're going to go through piece by piece. Is there anything that you want to add before we just kind of start the process here and go through it line by line and watch you dismantle it?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, I'm tempted to say that this is just white supremacy dressed up in Christian clothing, except for two things. That number one, it's not really dressed up in much Christian clothing. And number two, to call it white supremacy is actually to make it more tolerant than it is. Because at the end of the day, this guy's not even a white supremacist. Most white people he has problems with. As we're going to see, right, he's like an Anglo-Saxon Protestantist, which we don't even have a word for, but it is a callback to a kind of position that existed especially across the 1800s in the United States. And he's not afraid to basically say that he's a member of the tradition of like know-nothingism in the United States.
Wait, I'm sorry. What is know-nothingism? I'm not familiar
So
with that.
know-nothingism was actually an anti-immigrant political movement, and it was appropriately named know-nothingism. It was a nativist, largely anti-intellectual, anti-education movement in the United States against Catholic immigrants, against Eastern European immigrants, because this was back when like the Eastern Europeans, the Irish, the Italians were not included in the category of white yet. And so what he's going back to is actually kind of old-fashioned white supremacy. We're talking about, we're really looking for the Anglo-Saxon, which is a myth, but we're going back to that kind of 1800s vibe. And this is the kind of stuff that people in the United States, I think, couldn't say openly about themselves for a long period of time. Yeah. And it says something about where we're getting, that these people can say this openly about themselves and get press for doing it, actually become influential in conservative circles. It's scary.
You know, what's interesting about the video that we're going to watch, he says a lot of things that I know that they are radical, but they're not. They don't sound like the caricature of a racist that you have in your head, right? Where he's like, white people are superior and other people are not. But he says it in what almost sounds like, some kind of intellectual vernacular. He cites these sources. And that's why we're pulling this, because I want you to hear what racism and supremacy actually sound like and start training your ears to hear it. Because once you start learning how to pick up on it, you start hearing it in right-wing circles way more frequently than you thought was actually happening. So, okay, I'm ready to start. Are you ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, great. Friends, again, thank you for being here. Please hit that like button. It helps this video get out to more people, especially during a live. And again, all super chats are getting split between the organization and Kevin to thank him for his research and work on this. Without further ado, let's start the React Part 1. Here we go.
It's a privilege to be here, just to sit in the audience and watch great men such as Joe Rigney and Joel Webbin and great professors of great universities and YouTubers and pastors. I'm not any of those things. I'm really a guy who lives out in the woods. Don't have any of those special fancy titles.
The entire talk.
Okay. Yeah. There it is. Fact check true. He's right there. Okay.
He is a guy who lives.
But I am a father, and I want my children to live in a Christian nation. So I am thankful for all of you for being here, for listening to me talk, and being patient with. I guess I give detailed definitions. That's what Joe Rigney said. But again, thank you for being here. So nothing about our thinking on ethnicity is normal. We Westerners are weird. We are unlike the rest of the world. Most people around the world, whether Christian or not, have a distinct people, some group to which they strongly belong, which has outgroups and often enemies. The strong feeling of peoplehood is true for a significant portion of those who even make their living in the United States, whose bodies are in the U.S., but whose hearts remain in Mexico or Africa or the Vatican or the Levant. A nation of immigrants can be nothing less than a hodgepodge of groups from somewhere other than the soil they currently depend on. America, in this conception, is the universal place, a space for everyone, a no place. It is good only because everything about it is derivative. Nothing is from here except the Native Americans or American Indians, the only people group granted true rootedness with that term native, or Latin for born or arisen. America is a land for people whose place lies on foreign shores, and to be truly American is to fight and even die to make this land a no place, a geographic space, an economic zone for any and all. There is no distinct American ethnicity, a distinct people and place, so we're told. America is the universal nation. It's rendered good not by settled hearts, nor by a culturally bound people. It requires that you affirm some universal abstract propositions, say that everyone gets to decide for himself the meaning of existence. But that's basically it. The deeper meaning of life, the sort of things that the heart owns, such as ethnic identity, cultural particularity, or a strong connection of people and place, must be supplied or rooted outside of America. Thus, the true Americans in New America are the hyphenated Americans. In a sense, these people are more complete human beings than the unhyphenated. Why? Because they have settled hearts with a people and a place, albeit a foreign place, while the unhyphenated have no place of their own. But we, the unhyphenated, those who trace our ancestry to Western Europe, whose roots extend beyond the Immigration Act of 1965 and Ellis Island, and which unite to this soil, we, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who founded, built, and died for and led this country for most of its history, we are not permitted in this new America to have a people or a place that is distinctly ours. There's no distant place that we call home. We have nowhere else to go. But this is our home. This is our native land. We are Native Americans, born of those who didn't immigrate, but who settled here. We are the sons and daughters of the people who settled this land. To describe America as a nation of immigrants, writes the great Harvard political scientist Samuel Huntington, is to stretch a partial truth into a misleading falsehood and to ignore the central fact of America's beginning as a society of settlers.
Okay.
So
I was like, wow, this is a long clip that you pulled.
I want to give him a chance, to get the picture that he wants to draw, because
fair,
this
yes.
is what he's doing is an act of myth making, right? I mean,
okay.
this is he's trying to lay out a kind of mythology of America that can compete and defeat other mythologies of America. Now, having a myth and propagating myths is not in itself problematic. I mean, myths are just stories by which we live. They can be related to history, not related to history, but they tell us what our values should be. They tell us the direction we should go. And, I mean, that's cool. And one of them that he's pointing to that he doesn't like is the kind of myth of an immigrant nation. Right. All myths, even the best myths, oversimplify history, and he's pointing out that the myth of an immigrant nation in some ways oversimplifies. That's got to be true, right? But then he's going to put forward his own mythology, and we can assess whether a mythology is good both by how it relates to history and by the values that it advocates. So the real question we need to ask is, what is the mythology that he's laying out? And this is in part what we're going to learn through the entire speech, right?
Yeah.
But we can understand a couple of things about it. First, his mythology originates with a problem. And the fundamental problem is that the United States is a no place, right?
Yes.
The United States lacks a culture that can undergird its values because it is a valueless space where people come in and bring their own values, right? And his claim is that if this is true, then America actually can't have any values of its own. America's concern with equality, with universalism, with altruism. All of those things are going to fall by the wayside because America doesn't actually have a culture that can sustain those values.
Right.
Now, this is a pretty common conservative critique. I mean, there are very reasonable people who have made this critique of America and liberalism. So you have like theologians like Stanley Hauerwas, and philosophers like Alistair MacIntyre, who have put forward this critique of liberalism. Now, they put forward their own alternatives, right? So Stanley Hauerwas says, basically, we should all become members of this kind of Anabaptist, like Mennonite churches, and we should just live in contrast to nationalism, right? MacIntyre eventually went with a kind of Roman Catholic community that he thought. But there are other philosophers who have tried to give responses to this that have said, you know what, that might be an oversimplification of culture. Like, we don't all have exactly the same culture, but like John Rawls is a philosopher who says, you know, there's a kind of overlapping agreement between cultures in the United States.
Right.
And so even though we all have our own different cultures, we all overlap enough that we agree on certain things, and that produces enough of a culture. Or Jeffrey Stout is another philosopher who said there is a democratic culture, a culture that requires us to give reasons to each other when we want to make policies, right? Instead of just appealing to our religion, our revelation, our ethnicity, or anything like that. Democracy itself kind of forms a culture, and we get trained in that. And if we do it well as a nation, we train everybody in the culture of democracy.
Right.
I kind of like, I write a lot about the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr.
Yes.
I like his approach, which says, yeah, here's the thing. Christianity and democracy kind of overlap in that they both need a culture, but that culture has to be paradoxical because it has to be a culture that's critical of itself. So it can't be a closed or uncritical culture because the Christian always recognizes, right, whatever nation I'm a part of, whatever race I'm a part of, that's not the end all be all of things because God's out there and God's beyond my nation, my race, right? God's even beyond the church. And so one of the things that Niebuhr thinks is that Christians should all be in a culture that is critical of their own culture. They should be members of churches that are critical of their own churches, that has to be a part of the culture, right? And he thinks that one of the things that makes Christianity, as Niebuhr understands it, overlap with democracy is that he thinks that's exactly what you need for a democracy, is a culture that is critical of itself, right? So its own values require self-criticism.
Yeah.
So now we can come back to Wolfe's approach.
Wait, let me just pause to make sure I understand what you said. I just want to interpret it very simply. Essentially what you're saying is that, yes, there can be a critique of like this, how do we form culture or the vacuum that is American culture at times or liberalism, etc. And there are different theories put forth by different people from various different Christian perspectives, secular perspectives of how we can do that with shared culture or recognizing the difference in our cultural background, but still uniting under common ideals. So that's a common thing. So Wolfe's critique of that isn't necessarily uncommon, but what might be, or necessarily even dangerous. But what is going to head us in a dangerous direction is what you're about to say when it comes to Wolfe's solution put forward. Is that a fair way of kind of summarizing this conversation so far?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, one of Wolfe's rhetorical moves is to pretend as if the only options are that kind of vacuous, empty place or his ethnic Anglo-Saxon, solution to it, which is there's just lots of other options out there.
Right. Better options.
So if, say, Niebuhr is right and you need a culture that's critical of itself, we can see why Wolfe's proposal to solve the problem is going to be a mess.
Got it.
Because basically what he's going to suggest is that America is and can only be grounded in the culture, the ethnicity of a particular group of people.
Right.
And that's going to require that he be completely uncritical of that group of people.
Right.
He wants to say that you're only going to be able to defend egalitarianism and universalism and altruism, these American values, if you have it grounded in a culture. But it turns out that he grounds that in a particular culture in a way that doesn't allow you to be universalist, egalitarian, or
Right.
altruistic.
Right.
Because
Right.
if you say, well, this culture is going to have to defend the place of the white man in the culture in order to be universalist, and egalitarian, we should immediately say, hold on.
Right.
That's contradictory. Like, you've got a self-defeating proposal here.
Right.
That you're not actually advocating for those American values that you're pretending you're advocating for. You're
Right.
actually advocating for a kind of totalitarian cultural system, where the culture of one people and the goods of those people take precedence over everybody else. And you're pretending that that is egalitarian, that is universalist, that is altruistic, when it's clearly not.
Right.
So that's going to be the move. And basically, to do this, he's going to have to obscure history. And he's already started to do that in his opening remarks.
Right.
So
with his comments about native folks and that kind of stuff you're talking about. Yeah.
I mean, right. So he points out that the idea of a nation of immigrants doesn't match with history. But in order to get his account on the table, he's going to have to erase Native Americans.
Right.
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 He's going to, that seems a much more egregious problem than saying, oh, yeah, we were all immigrants. Okay.
Right.
He's going to have to get rid of slavery. I mean, because he can't acknowledge that this culture that he's advocating for has problems in it, that it doesn't fit. So he's gonna claim, as he did in those first few minutes, what is it that Anglo-Saxons fought for and built this country, and it's like a lot of that was slave labor. How do you not recognize that? I mean, and the idea that this is a more accurate historical depiction than the idea of a nation of immigrants is just delusional.
Right. 100%.
So he doesn't have a basis, actually, a superior myth in terms of history, and he doesn't have a superior myth in terms of values. And those are really the two criteria that we could judge a kind of myth according to. And this is basically the lesson that's going to get repeated and repeated throughout his speech, is just the ways that in order to get this myth off the ground, he has to erase history, and he has to participate in this this kind of cognitive dissonance about a particularistic and culturally particular, structure that he's going to claim is there in order to support universalism, egalitarianism, and American values as we think of them.
Got it. Well, that's really helpful. Two things here, friends. Number one, if you liked that initial monologue from Kevin, please smash the like button. I'm going to say this over and over again. It will help get this video out there. Secondly, I want to point out one thing on my end. At the beginning of that conversation, Stephen Wolfe thanked Joel Webbin for being there. I have two clips of Joel. We'll play the second one later on. Let me just play the first one of Joel so you get an idea of the kind of folks that Stephen is surrounding himself with and some of their views actually fleshed out, right? Because Stephen can make what sounds like, let's consider the perspective. Maybe there's some good here. Let me show you brass tacks what this world actually believes in. Here we go.
We are going to behave as a Christian people. And what does that mean? It means we're going to ban pornography. It means we are going to ban no-fault divorce. It means we are going to we are going to behave as a Christian people. And what does that mean? It means we're going to ban pornography. It means we are going to ban no-fault divorce. It means we are going to utterly abolish abortion, including in vitro. including the hormonal birth control pill. Every single one of its forms, not just the Planned Parenthood clinic in Texas, but we're going to go down to the local CVS and we're going to start knocking those pills off the shelf. No more human sacrifice. So,
so there you go. There you go. This is what we're going to watch. Stephen's perspective. This is what it looks like fleshed out in culture. So I'm going to just set the stage of how extreme these positions are, and I don't want to scare people. I try and be very factual with how I position this. But to be very clear, these people are entering the evangelical mainstream more and more. My case in point is this. Doug Wilson, who founded Canon Press and is still very much tied to it, is the person and the organization that actually published Stephen Wolfe's book. Doug Wilson was not only on Tucker Carlson's podcast, he's now being platformed at Turning Point USA's Believers Summit alongside people like Ali Stuckey, David Barton, more mainstream right-wing evangelical figures. So this is not like in some corner of the world where like even white evangelicals are like, oh, these guys are crazy. There are direct connections and they're slowly making ground in these spaces. We have to be aware of that. We just have to be. And that's honestly why I take the time, why you take the time to call this stuff out, because I don't care about some random bro on YouTube who's just saying stupid shit, whatever. But when you have power and influence and you're tied to bigger organizations that want to make America great again, you have to understand what's underneath of it, what isn't said always out loud. And that's why we're pulling this clip and kind of going through it piece by piece.
Yeah, no, I think this is, I mean, if you look at like Project 2025
yes.
And the echoes that you can hear in that from exactly this rhetoric, exactly this kind of worldview, it is scary. I mean, and that is basically one step away from the people that might be the next presidential administration in the United States.
100%. All right, let's keep going. We got a lot to get through, and we're already, 33 minutes in, so here we go.
Now, white people in the Western world, and this is crucial, are their own in-groups, out-group. I'll say it again. White people in the Western world are their own in-groups, out-group. So what do I mean by this? First, an in-group consists of those to whom you direct your affections, your thoughts, your principal actions for their good. And an out-group may or may not be hostile, but it consists of those to whom you do not ordinarily direct your affections, thoughts, and principal actions. Now, the in-group for white people, as I said earlier, is composed of all people. If you are human, you are in. Our in-group is not white or Anglo-Saxon. It extends to all. So keep that in mind. It's a very important point. But we must begin to recognize that we are the out-group of that in-group. We are the hostile out-group. We are our history's oppressor in this schema. It follows that we as a group cannot stand up for ourselves. Take even a recent positive development in opposing anti-white discrimination in university admissions. University admissions, by the way, when they seek to create a diverse student body, must discriminate against white applicants because whites are second only to Asians in grades and test scores. Almost every diversity program must, at least in effect, harm white people. Diversity, whenever you see diversity, it is code for fewer white heterosexual men. Maximal diversity is the absence of the straight white man. Given the sheer number of white applicants for college admissions, whites are the most discriminated against in college admissions. But how do we respond? If we respond at all, how do we argue against this discrimination? Not by referring to discrimination against us. Indeed, we cannot see ourselves as a distinct group, so we can't be a protected class. What do we do instead? We point to discrimination against Asians. In recent Supreme Court cases, this is precisely what has happened.
Okay, so
All right.
So let's break this down.
I need something stronger than this blueberry coffee.
Yeah.
Please break it down. Break it down.
This is the narrative of the oppressed white male, right?
Wait, hold on. Sorry. Can I just say one thing before you start? This is a common narrative that is way embedded in mainstream right-wing culture. I mean, I've heard Turning Point USA contributors talk about this. Tucker Carlson talks about this. This idea that it's reverse discrimination, it's anti-white. This is not just in these spaces. I hear it way beyond as well. Just want to point that out.
Yeah, no, and it makes sense if you accept the kind of mythology that this guy is putting forward, a mythology that cannot accept that, say, white people have benefited in the past from things that were not good, right? If you erase like slavery, if you erase Jim Crow, if you
Right.
erase all of that from history,
Right.
then yeah, the kind of affirmative action will just seem to be injustice. Because if we all just exist on an equal playing field, right, to start with, then any position that benefits any group will be a form of injustice. Now, so what he's putting forward, he's claiming that white people are their own in-groups out-group, right?
Yes.
The in-group here is the group that you act in favor of. And he claims that in Western society, the in-group is everybody. Now, first,
Yeah. Right.
I'd like to, I mean, it would be great if this were the case, that Western society actually just treated everybody as, you know, a somebody who should benefit from society immediately. But the idea that white people as a group function on that basis is simply deluded. There has been, since 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was put in place by Democrats, okay, Democrats have never won the majority of whites in a presidential election. Like no matter, even at the time that it was like Clinton from Arkansas is running and he's basically blowing the Republicans out of the water, he won 44% of white voters, right? And why is this? It's because white people vote on the basis of identity politics. White people vote for what they see as their best interest. As they tend to do this, right? So this isn't, we don't live in a world where we actually accept that the in-group is just everybody.
Right.
We might say that happens.
Because Stephen said for white people, the in-group is everyone. That's what he said.
Everybody.
Right? Yeah.
And so he says
exactly.
all white people are really acting self-sacrificially all the time, right?
Right.
It's like, if that were the case, why would the Supreme Court, which is mostly white men appointed by a white president, you know, approved of by an overwhelmingly white Congress, right? Why is it that they would have gotten rid of affirmative action? Right. This was an entirely, it's not like whites don't have their own interests and seek their own interests and don't have the majority power in the country. I mean, this is just delusional to think that these people are the people that are treated as victims, are oppressed in the society. But this is his second move, right? Is that, well, affirmative action must be oppressive to white people.
Right.
Because affirmative action is set up to correct for historical injustices.
Right.
But if you embrace a worldview that is completely uncritical about histories of white injustices,
Right.
you aren't going to be able to see what is happening with affirmative action. Right? Why is it that nobody makes the argument that white people are oppressed by affirmative action? Well, it's because white people have benefited throughout history so that we are the majority of people who go to college. Right? I mean, like, there's a reason that black people are less likely to make it to the point that they're applying for college. And that has to do with historical and built-in racism in the society. So affirmative action tries to balance that out at that point. Now, is that a perfect system? No, it'd be much better to address it earlier on. But it's at least trying to do something to address historical problems, right? And his worldview just doesn't allow him to see this because he has built in a complete lack of criticism about his own culture. By the way, this is another thing that he does, is he shifts back and forth between talking about culture and talking about race. And you note at this point, he's fallen all the way over into talking about white people and the need for white people to be defended in terms of
Suddenly,
law.
I don't see race. People are like, no, we do see race. White people.
Yeah, white people. When it comes to me wanting to defend
Yes.
the place of white people, right?
Yes.
And when he wants to be careful saying I'm not being racist, he will use culture as his
Yes.
term, right?
That's right.
But as soon as he gets into the actual issues, it will be clear that he's trying to defend like white people, right? And then as he gets along, even a narrower section of white people as he goes.
I mean, maybe this is not the perfect analogy or metaphor to use, but essentially one way of thinking about it is, if you have a couple runners on the track about to start and you break one of their legs, and then you tie them to that starting place, and then you pop the gun and they race. Even if you finally let that person off of like the rope that you have them tied to, their leg is still broken. Just because they can run doesn't mean that they're actually fully able to, given the damage that was done, right? So, a lot of times what happens is you hear people in these spaces be like, well, guys, like we're not enslaving people anymore. We're not segregated. Yeah, but the effects and the deep systemic effects of things like redlining, of the Tulsa race massacre, of Black Wall Street, right? All those things contribute to the data that we have that shows that on average, right, Black people have about a tenth of the amount of overall wealth that the average white American has. That's not because one group is inherently a harder working class of people. It's because there are certain systems and things built in that have held people behind at the expense of those people, right? So you're right. I mean, affirmative action, frankly, I don't know all the details about it, but I know that it's an attempt, as flawed as it could be. It's an attempt to try and correct what attributes to decades of obstacles and things based on race. I also think, last thing, and I know we have so much to get through, I'll stop rambling here, but this is actually one of the great points of what critical race theory can demonstrate. When you actually read some of the early critical race theorists, Derek Bell, for example, he points out how even when segregation was outlawed, right, people found a way to still maintain supremacist type systems around the law by kind of making it covert, colorblindness, etc. So it's a deeper issue than just changing a few laws. There's a cultural component to it. And so again, once you start reading these things and having the eyes for this stuff, you start to be able to put into, I think, a more logical framework of why things are the way they are. Not, well, if Black people just worked harder, they can get to where us white people are. That falls apart like so quickly, right? And so I think that the points you're bringing up are really important here.
Yeah. No, and this is, he doesn't have any argument to address these facts, right? I mean, what he does is he just doesn't mention any of the history of racism. He pretends like it doesn't exist. And then he says really emphatically, well, white people are being treated as if we are the villains in this story. Right. And it's like, that's not an argument. That is an appeal to a community that already agrees with you because they too are ignoring history.
Exactly. Totally agree. Good. Hey, Brittany, thank you so much for the super chat. Appreciate that. Again, friends, all super chats are getting split between the TNE organization, and we'll also go to Kevin. If you like this video so far, smash that like button. It really helps us. Let's keep going. There's more to get through. Great thoughts so far, Kevin. Really helpful. So let's keep it going.
Anything that benefits whites is bad, even if it comes from treating everyone equally. Once you're aware of this rhetoric, this rhetorical move, that basically any policy that benefits whites is bad, you'll end up seeing this everywhere. Indeed, like a policy is bad if in the end the effect would benefit whites and not others. So, and that's because anything that harms whites for the good of non-whites is good, and such harm is questionable only if it also harms non-whites. So if university admissions only harmed whites and not Asians, would anyone fuss about it? Probably not. Would anyone care if you did fuss about it? Probably not. In fact, you'd probably be called a racist. Actually, I'm sure you could be called a racist.
Okay,
all right.
So the reason you could be called a racist is because it's racist. This is...
Wait, hold on. Yay.
So he actually said, and I mean, I want to give him the credit for thinking that he just misspoke here, but he says incredulously, right, about this position that he's arguing. He says, oh yeah, a policy is bad if it would benefit whites and not other people. And I'm like, Yes, that
Yep.
is the
Right.
definition of racism that you just put forward. Now, it's covered over by this little veneer of, well, actually, what we're doing is we're treating everybody equally
Right.
because, of course, he's ignoring all the history of inequality and racism in the country. And so he can say, oh, no, we'll just treat everybody equally now, by which he means we won't help anybody come up from their position of oppression to be equal with us. Right. But that,
Yes.
that there is a reason why you would get called racist for that. It's because it is a form of racism.
100%. Really quick, I need to say this. Corey, a $49 super chat. I mean, holy. Yeah. Thank you. That's so kind. I really appreciate that. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think great point here, Kevin. And anyway, I know we have much to get through, so we can keep going. But I think it's a really great point that you brought up of like, yeah, that's because that would be racist. So. All right, here we go.
What I'm describing here is not simply the views or the rhetorical strategies of communists and socialists and modern liberals.
I swear, every time these bros talk, it's a matter of time before communist, socialist, Marxist, liberal comes up. Like, oh, I should have bet the house on, like, within 5 minutes of this talk, that language is coming up. It's, socialist. This guy has a PhD, by the way. He has his doctorate, and he conflates socialism and communism as if it's just... Sorry,
but he's actually doing it here to throw conservatism under the bus for not being regressive enough. So as we go on, we'll
I apologize for interrupting. I just had to call that out.
Go ahead.
The rhetoric of American conservatives. It is practically universal. Even for conservatives, whites are their own in-groups, out-group. So take the typical conservative's narrative of American history. The conservative narrative is actually far more progressive than the left-wing progressives narrative. Kind of ironic there. In essence, America, according to the conservative historian, has overcome the dominance of the white Protestant male, as we've slowly extended rights to non-whites and non-males. The overarching theme is that the American founding issued a promise, and the white male fulfilled that promise, or is fulfilling that promise, by overcoming himself. Fulfilling the promise of the founding is simply the positive way of saying that white males overcame themselves. Most conservatives will simply pick a recent year from which to command history and say, stop progressing. But inevitably, one of their buddies, a highly respected friend, someone like Jonah Goldberg, will write
a Jew, by the way, that's important.
Oh, he's Jewish?
Yeah, so he notes a Jewish writer. He later notes that he doesn't like the Jews who have become important figures in leading conservatism, which is, so there's a little dog whistle right there.
Yeah, thank you.
Case for article, and then the conservatives will update their timeless principles, ensuring that they remain the controlled opposition. That's what they've always been. Of course, this doesn't stop the progress. When you have a narrative built on progress, it never stops.
Okay. So the way that he's doing this, right? The problem with conservatives...
I'm trying to keep up with like what he's saying. I know it's racist somehow, but I can't make sense of it. Help me out.
The problem with conservatives, he says, is that they're too progressive because they accept that there was something wrong at the founding of the country. And so they accept that it's been progress, that we've moved beyond that, right? And he appears to be he wants to get rid of that claim. And what's the fucking alternative? I mean, there was slavery at the beginning of the United States, right? It makes sense that contemporary conservatives are going to want to claim that, at least we overcame slavery, right?
Right.
He thinks...
Yeah. I mean, even Sean Hannity would acknowledge that, you know? That was bad back then, what we did, yeah.
Right,
exactly.
But he thinks that conservatives make a mistake in acknowledging that there has been progress, right? And the way that he says it, right? Even the conservatives accept that by expanding things out beyond the white man to non-whites and, non-men, we're participating in progress, and we need to get rid of that narrative. And it's like, you can't be serious unless you want to go back to slavery, right? I mean, that it just it boggles the mind that he can actually say these things and seem completely unaware of, or maybe is aware of and is just hiding in the background what he's actually calling for.
Well, let's really make this emphatic. As you were doing that, I remembered that there is a clip of our favorite person, not this guy, of Joel Webbin talking about slavery. Actually, I have this clip pulled up. I want to play. It's about a 2-minute clip, but I think this will kind of reinforce the point that you made. And remember, Stephen Wolfe gave this guy a shout out at the beginning of his talk. Here's what he said.
And then there's like a last bastion, like a final resistance in this little town, Moscow, Idaho. And they talk about, how simultaneously this is going on, with like rough.
Moscow, Idaho is where Doug Wilson, he's talking essentially about Doug Wilson with the work that they're doing in Moscow, Idaho. And again, remember, Doug Wilson now being platformed at Turning Point USA's Believers Summit alongside former President Trump, Ali Stuckey, a bunch of people. So again, we're not that far off, friends, from this being really embedded in the right-wing media world.
And then over here, in Nashville, there's a Fight, Laugh, Feast conference, and this is going down, and Doug Wilson's there, and these guys, and they just say what the Bible says, and they don't apologize, and they're not embarrassed. They're not. I have spent, to my shame, I thought I was cool. I was not cool. It's embarrassing. It is embarrassing that I, for years, was embarrassed by the Bible. Not all of it, but there were certain parts that, I'd be embarrassed about, like slavery or something like that,
Yeah.
And whereas now, I had somebody recently on my show, and they brought up slavery, and they're a Christian, but you could tell it was a little bit like kind of embarrassed, and they were saying, but like, kidnapping. And so the African slave trade, America, man stealers, that was a crime, biblically and punishable and atrocious in the sight of God. And so America has bad roots. And I paused him for a second. Well, just for the record, real quick, the founders weren't going to Africa and stealing people. They were buying them. So who stole them? Africans.
Whoa! You can't go there, man. You don't have the proper melanin to talk about such things.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the beauty. That's the beauty is I don't have to be ashamed. I don't have to be ashamed, but rightly dividing the word of truth, black or white, doesn't matter. And but you're right. Like, I know you're joking, but it's just like, I was like, man, I'm embarrassed about the Bible, or I'm a white dude, I can't talk about it. And there's just such freedom. And I'll be honest.
It's so much freedom.
So much of it came by seeing another guy. Yeah. Right, because that's the thing is like that you're scared and you stay in your little corner, you stay on your little leash because you're like, I don't know what'll happen. I don't know what. But when you see some other guy do it, and you're like, that's the worst. That's the worst thing that could happen.
Absolutely.
Vice writes an article about you. Russell Moore won't invite you to his birthday party anymore. Like.
By the way, when he says that guy, he's talking about Doug Wilson. I want to point that out. And before I go forward, I do want to point this out, and I'll give it to you, Kevin, because as you can imagine, that take is absolutely horseshit, yet that's who Stephen Wolfe calls out. I do want to shout out, actually, Kip, I know that you're here. Dr. Kip has a great channel, and has done a lot of work with quite a few people, friends of mine, Dr. Jennifer Bird and others, really going into the Bible and slavery and kind of dismantling some of the common evangelical apologetic rhetoric. So, Kip, go ahead and put your channel, my friend, right in the chat, because I recommend it to a lot of people. It's just a great way to kind of understand what's the Bible as far as like the data goes actually say about slavery, and then what do we do with that. I will tell you, it's an infinitely better take than whatever the hell Joel Webbin just said. So I want to point that out. But yeah, I mean, I would just love your thoughts on this, Kevin. I know I didn't prep you for it, but as you were talking, I'm like, wait, I've heard of this before from the same dude, Joel.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this goes back to something I was saying earlier, that I think that there was in America up until, say, 2016, a tendency that people couldn't say these things or wouldn't say these things in public. So you
Totally.
see him talking about, he felt like there was that leash on him, right?
Yep.
That wouldn't allow him to do that. And I think, so I was talking about J.D. Vance recently came out and had a video of him in defense of right-wing conspiracy theories, where he says, we need to get over that kind of tightness in our chest, that leads us to think we have to condemn like Alex Jones and Marjorie, and these are, and it's like, you know what? That was a good thing. Sometimes those feelings of tightness in our chest, those things that stop us from saying the racist, horrible things, there are reasons that they are there. And those are actually moral, right? I have intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, right.
That doesn't mean that I should just blurt them out. That's not. That's
and
not
then embrace them more and more.
yeah. No, I mean, this is exactly it. We used to be able to look back at the 1950s and things that people said in public and be shocked. Like, I can't believe they said that in public. And now we're getting back to a place where people are saying those things in public again. And it's deeply disturbing, just the regressiveness
100%.
of the right on this.
Yeah, I mean, we can put this in very classic conservative language. Hey guys, in the marketplace of ideas, some ideas are better than others, so let them win out. Okay, great. This is a bad idea. This is a shitty idea. This idea should not be in our public discourse. Let the free market have its way, and let's all vote it out because it's garbage. See, we can do this either way.
We fought a war over this.
Right. All right. Back to the video. I had to point that out. I know it's a detour, but it's important. The details are there. Friends, thank you for tuning in. Almost 200 people watching this live. I love that. I love going live. It's so much fun. Thanks for your support. Smash that like button. Let's keep going.
But in so doing, you must affirm and celebrate everyone's diversity except your own. Again, you take upon yourself the burden of your ancestors' promise of equality and freedom, and you fulfill it by overcoming and villainizing yourself on behalf of all. You become the sacrificial hero, resulting in your displacement, a deracinated heart or rootlessness, and the loss of self-respect and a self-affirming people of your own.
Wow. Okay. I mean, talk about like every accusation is actually a confession. You know what I mean? Like, geez.
Well, it's fascinating because number one, again, he's talking about this idea that the in-group for white people is everyone. White people are self-sacrificial and we're, giving of ourselves and we don't even have an identity, but we're celebrating everybody else's identity. Which is not an accurate description of what's happening. But what I find really interesting here is he's making an argument for Christian nationalism, right? But the whole idea of self-sacrifice that he seems to hate so much, right? That he sees as the problem that white people have become self-sacrificial. Now, number one, I don't think that's actually happened. But number two, that is actually a Christian thing, right? If white people became self-sacrificial, if you're a Christian, it would seem that that would be a good thing. But this is a repetitive thing that he does every time that he gets to talking in something that is like Christian language. He is almost always talking about the position that he despises. Right. So, white people are just supposed to celebrate other people and they're not supposed to take any pride in themselves and their own ethnicity. And I mean, that I don't think that that's a call for like everybody, but I think that people who end up in powerful positions that have been advanced by history gain greatly by listening to the Christian message about self-sacrifice and opening themselves to the other. And this is exactly what he thinks the problem is. And as he goes, like I say, he continues to do this. And so much so that it really convinces me there's nothing Christian about this nationalism. Christian is just a term that he's using for his white Anglo-Saxon maleism, right? And he just wants to use the kind of evangelical, structures to push his message out there. But there's nothing here that is Christian. And as a matter of fact, just about everything that he says, that he complains about, is at times going to be, explicit quotes from the Bible that he's using to describe the positions that he hates.
Well, that's why we often say that Christian nationalism, Jesus told us to bear a cross for our enemies, give away our privilege, because he did, and Christian nationalism wants to build crosses to crucify theirs. Like that's the difference, right? This is all about maintaining power and privilege and being mad, right, at the thought of even giving away some of it or letting your other neighbors flourish, because of historical injustice. The complete opposite of Christ. And the last thing I want to add to this, then we'll move on, is we also forget, too, that the idea of whiteness actually erases cultures and identities, right? I had this epiphany. We're dropping an amazing conversation with Lisa Sharon Harper. It's our next in-studio convo. It comes out Monday. She's amazing. And we talk about how I am labeled white in America, but I'm actually a combination of German, Italian, I'm part Greek. Besides eating pasta and like watching 300 one time, I have no connection to those actual like ethnicities or cultures. I'm just white. I'm just a white person. And so whiteness actually hurts white people in so many ways because it actually erases actual cultural heritage that you might find brings a vibrant and unique flavor to the world to add in with other people's cultures and perspectives, right? So even this idea of like us white people don't have a culture, well, in a way, like you're kind of right because whiteness erases culture identity. It erases the idea of where you came from. In fact, I'm pretty sure you picked up on it for your recap, because I know you summarized some of these clips. He talks about that. He talks about how people maintain certain ethnic identities when they come to America and how that's problematic. It's actually a perfect example of what whiteness actually does. I'm all fired up. Too much coffee. Okay. Breathe, Tim, breathe. Guys, are you hanging in there? I'm reading your comments. Are you all okay? It's okay. Breathe. We're in this together. We're getting through it. We're an hour in. There's more work to go. Keep hitting that like button. This is really helpful. And again, we're splitting all super chats to give Kevin support for all the research and work he did to really unpack this stuff. Kevin, you're kicking ass. Let's keep going.
So multiculturalism is animated by what I want to call a sort of social pathology. It is pathology because multiculturalism is demonstrably bad for the majority by every measure and by everyday experience. And yet it remains, in the US and especially among the majorities of European countries, the central theme of policy and political rhetoric. What's incredible about this and what's so weird about it all is that even liberal academics have shown conclusively that multiculturalism undermines social trust. It distances people from one another. It diminishes social capital and civic engagement.
Okay, I was actually curious to get your thoughts on this because I heard this and I went, is that true?
Yeah. So first of all, let's take the first claim. Multiculturalism is negative for the majority on every possible measure, no matter what. That's absurd. Unless you never go out for Mexican food, right? This is like, I remember Trump making this thing about, what, you want a Mexican food truck on every corner? At which the point is, I actually would like that. That would be wonderful. Yeah. I love going to my kids' school and seeing, kids who are in dresses from Afghanistan, I love that.
Totally.
It's absurd to say that multiculturalism is bad by every measure. Now, he's talking particularly about this question of social trust. Yes. Do you trust your neighbors? Now, there have been a series of social scientific studies on this. One by Robert Putnam, who's famous for his book Bowling Alone, found that there was less trust of neighbors in multicultural neighborhoods, right? However, later sociologists have come back to that study and looked at the data in a little bit more fine grain. And they find, number one, most of that lack of trust was from white people in those neighborhoods who didn't trust minorities who had moved into those neighborhoods. At which the problem might not be multiculturalism,
Oh my
it
gosh.
might be racism to start with, right?
Right.
It's also true that multicultural neighborhoods are often neighborhoods where an established ethnicity in one area is getting displaced by another group of people, right?
Yes.
Where, say, there's turnover, which leads to a lack of trust. So that's not clear that it's multiculturalism that's leading to that problem.
Right.
And so it's not clear that the social scientific evidence about this is not as clear as he presents it. And it's not clear that the problem there isn't actually racism rather than multiculturalism as the actual root problem that you're dealing with.
This is actually a great point that you make. I appreciate that. It's a good point. I mean, I live in New Jersey, one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse states. Really, we have 8 million people in a very small area, and I'll tell you, like, first of all, I love it here, and I love it for selfish reasons. Like, I love that I can get authentic food from all different parts of the world whenever I want, you know. But also, like, I've grown up just being even my very conservative church was very multi-ethnic in terms of people who were there, and they brought in their culture. Like, I'm just used to that, you know. So, and I don't want to always appeal to experience or anecdotal evidence to prove a bigger point, but at least for me, and as far as living in the state that I live in, multiculturalism has only helped me make more friends and realize how big the world is and appreciate different ways of celebrating different things, you know, from my vantage point.
Yeah. Now, I mean, no doubt there are some potential negative effects. When you are next to somebody who doesn't share your culture, you're going to be skeptical of their culture. You experience things differently. You think about things differently. And there's no doubt that over time, right, people do end up figuring out how to live together. And that takes time. That takes work. The thing is, I wouldn't want to say it's all negative. There are positives, and positives that probably make it worth the costs of learning how to live together. Right. So the study that he actually cites directly in his speech is one that does support the conclusion, but also says, you know, it does increase social distrust, but it's a fairly small effect, and says it's not actually something that leads to doom and gloom or reasons to, you know, limit immigration, which is what he's using it here for. He really wants to make an anti-immigrant argument at the end of the day.
Do you find that as you were watching this and listening, that you heard a lot of the same, almost like pseudoscience that was used, you know, in the past couple centuries in America to reinforce ridiculous notions that we know are totally bogus about, you know, the sexual appetite of certain people groups and the intellect and, you know, how, you know, that kind of thing? Because, and again, like, I don't want to come across as anti-intellectual myself. I think data is important, but like, we can trace back a pretty long history of people doing science that we know now is completely debunked and is actually completely false. Were you hearing some of the same echoes in some of this stuff that he was saying?
Yeah, what I would say is usually the case. He does two different things. One is he'll draw on researchers that have his same biases. But the other is he'll draw on legitimate studies and just ignore all the qualifications that the people put in them. Like the study that he's citing here, which if you read the study, the authors of the study say, yes, it increases social distrust, but it's not that significant of an effect, and this shouldn't be a basis for policy because there are lots of other good outcomes of multiculturalism. And he just cites the one part that supports his conclusion, and he's definitely doing that to underwrite positions that have been taken by anti-immigrants, especially from the 1800s in the United States.
Fair. All right, let's keep going.
Studies also demonstrate that ethnic diversity harms a sense of the common good. So one study concluded this: ethnic diversity seems to lead to a shift from public spending on public goods, to the public provision of private goods. arguably because the latter can be targeted to particular ethnic groups. Now, let me explain that. Ethnic unity and cultural homogeneity correlates with the willingness to pay taxes for the common good, that is, for the sort of things that benefit everyone, such as good roads. But in a multicultural or ethnically diverse place, public spending is on ethnic targeted goods like scholarships or government jobs or business loans designated for particular ethnic groups. And all of this should sound very familiar. It's basically the Democratic platform today, which explicitly favors non-white, ethnically diverse clientele with targeted programs, notably business loans, welfare programs, disproportionately used by non-white groups.
Okay. Wow. So let's first of all, the claim, this is just disingenuous to some extent. He's arguing that liberals are not for spending on common good projects. The idea that, I mean, Biden just passed, one of the great achievements that he did was this infrastructure bill that built new roads, that did all of that. I mean, if there's anybody who doesn't want to spend on common goods, it's conservatives that are not wanting to spend on those. Now, his concern about multi-ethnic groups wanting more targeted spending goes back to that question about like affirmative action and past injustices.
Right.
Is the targeting of goods, can the targeting of goods towards particular groups also be in service to the common good? And if you believe that equality, right, equal opportunity is in fact a good of the society, is a common good, then it's entirely possible that the targeting of goods for particular groups is in service to the common good. The way that he presents it just begs the question against that conclusion. It says, oh, well, any targeted spending towards particular groups is de facto unjust, not for the common good. And again, you only get that conclusion if you ignored the entire history of inequality and injustice in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, not to... people hopefully know that we're not like some left-wing Democratic think tank like that's sponsored by huge people giving us money. So I don't really have I try and call balls and strikes, but I mean, Harris, Kamala Harris, who's probably gonna win the new nomination. Her first speech, she said, we want affordable health care. We want affordable child care. I usually hear Democrats calling for for livable wages. Like, those are pretty key to like the Democratic platform. And it's not targeting specific groups of people. It just says we want all Americans to be able to have access to these things, which, by the way, I'm totally in favor for. And I agree with you. Whenever there is targeted things, those people are also Americans. They're also citizens, right? We want to help those people who, due to a legacy of injustice, which we have terabytes and terabytes of data to prove, right, are still being affected by those things. If we want to target, it's almost like targeting cancer cells, right? Maybe the whole body doesn't need this. Maybe it needs, maybe certain parts of the body need certain types of treatment. You're not discriminating against an arm if you're targeting the foot. You know what I mean? You're actually helping the whole body. So I think that this whole, I'm sorry, I got to interrupt. Thank you. $100 super chat. Wow. I don't have anything besides this. Yay. Thank you so much. Friends, all super chats are being split between TNE, the organization, and Kevin. So that's a great way to help him out, especially for all the research that he did. But I'm just trying to say, I agree. I agree with you 100%.
Let me come back to one last thing. The last bit that he says there about welfare is just straight a dog whistle. Because he's listing it under targeted spending. But welfare is not targeted according to race or ethnicity. It is targeted according to like wealth, how much money you have. Right. Yes. So what he's doing there is he's just appealing to racist stereotypes about the idea that blacks are inferior and thus receive the majority of welfare spending. And that is just straight.
Here's the data. There you go. This is
a racist call.
43% of U.S. social assistance recipients are white. Let's just
Yeah.
stop with the dog whistling. It's racist. Reagan started it with the whole welfare queen rhetoric. It is a straight up racist dog whistle that is not based in any type of actual data, period. And by the way, to be very clear, I totally support helping poor whites as much as possible. Like, there is certainly a thing to be said, which is why MLK started the Poor People's Campaign, right? Because systemic, what's the word I'm looking for here? Essentially, poverty exists and it does not discriminate necessarily, right? There are plenty of people who are trying to make ends meet. We're in favor of trying to raise the standard for everyone in America. But to be clear, 43% of current welfare recipients are white people, which is just to go against Stephen's ridiculous and baseless accusation. Just want to be clear about that. All right. Well, should we keep going?
Yeah.
Go.
We Westerners do not deeply appreciate how good we've had it, with a culture strongly opposed to corruption and graft and bribery, and adamant about procedure following in civic institutions and bureaucracies. Though imperfect, we're still exceptionally altruistic. We follow the rules, we wait our turn in line, we don't cheat to get ahead, and we expect, as a matter of moral principle, that no public official has personal favorites for government services intended for all.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interject here. Has this guy seen Trump? I mean, give me a
Yeah.
break, bro. Like, are you joking?
Right. This is we're talking about this right after the conservative Supreme Court has basically said, yeah, you can give bribes provided that you pay them after a service.
Oh my God. Sorry.
It's
ridiculous.
It's mind-boggling. And realize that since he's appealing to an Anglo-Saxon American nationalism, right, his claim has got to be that we have been strict proceduralists against, corruption for the entirety of our history. Like, get rid of, the Jacksonian era, get rid of Tammany Hall. Has he ever been to Chicago, for God's sake? Like,
all right.
This
Segregation.
Yeah.
I mean, intentionally, it was a corrupt system to put certain people ahead of others. I mean, we literally, and by we, I mean white people, bombed Black Wall Street. Like, we literally carpet bombed the place. We set it on fire. Give me a break, dude.
But again, this is a narrative which has to erase all of that history in order to present this pure ethnic, right, Anglo-Saxon upstanding group. It just has to live in defiance of reality.
It's unreal. All right, we'll keep going. Elizabeth, thank you so much for the super chat. I sincerely appreciate it. If we get 5 more donations, any amount, you'll give another $10. That's a great incentive. Any amount of super donations, and Elizabeth gives $10 more to help us out. That means the world. Thank you. Let's keep going.
But that way of life is increasingly vanishing. It is the quite predictable failure of assimilation of foreigners into Western norms of altruism, universalism, and proceduralism. Social scientists have shown quite conclusively that immigrants in the West retain the values of their ancestral homelands.
Yep.
Again, Garrett Jones summarizes the findings. On average, hyphenated Americans appear to get about half of their attitudes towards social trust from the land that comes before the hyphen, persisting even to the 4th generation. That's how far they've studied this. I mean, the ethnocentrism of many people here will simply not diminish. Thus, Indians in America, having a strong documented culture of nepotism and ethnocentrism, will hire their own, even abusing the H-1B visa program, as we see in the tech industry.
So you know who the head of the Republican National Committee is right now, right? It is one of Trump's family members. Why? Well, pretty much nepotism. The idea that this is a function of foreign cultures coming in, right? There's actually there has been the Transparency International, which is a group that studies the prevalence of kind of corruption in societies, has noted an increase in corruption in the United States, but they attribute it to populism, nativism, and political polarization. Right? They don't see it as a product of immigration. Instead, it is white nationalists who are actually bringing about the rise in corruption in the United States at this
No
point.
way. I am. Are you telling me, hold on, back up. Are you
Yeah.
telling me, Kevin, that when Trump got elected and brought his entire family into the White House, giving them all kinds of jobs that they weren't qualified for and put them in positions of power that they had no experience or right to be in, are you saying that was what? No, you're not telling. No
that
way.
was nepotism. That was corruption. And Trump
Wow.
Trump followers will talk about like draining the swamp.
Yeah.
Trump is Shrek. He is like in charge of the swamp. That is what he does. It is a really strange disconnect from reality that he's also pushing here.
Yeah, I need to point out here, we've had 3 new super chats come in, which makes it close to Elizabeth giving $10 more based on what she said. So thank you, friends. It's so helpful to have that. Like I said, we are I deleted myself. How did I do that? Can you still hear me? Am I like God?
I can hear you.
Boom, there I am.
But as happens with the white man, you're self-sacrificial. You are clearly erasing yourself.
Oh, clearly. I've been
from this
persecuted.
conversation.
Friends, for real, I do want to say briefly, as we're kind of in the intermission part here, we are a nonprofit organization. We do all of our work completely paywall free. There's no Patreon account. There's no extra content or extra access to me or anyone else by giving money. We rely on the generosity of people like you to donate. All donations made to the organization are tax deductible. You can also click the link in our description that will bring you right to our donor page. You can make a donation there as well. Like I said, all super chats are being split between the organization and Kevin for his work on all of this, so I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Our YouTube channel has exploded the past month, and it's been so amazing meeting new people and hearing your perspectives. We do this work as often as we can. I post about 3 times a week on YouTube and on podcasts, plus Instagram. So we're doing our part to resist Christian nationalism and find a better path forward in our faith. All right, Kevin, shall we get back into it?
Let's go.
Pew, here we go. Oh, wrong screen. I was just gonna say.
You've got this fancy
my
new
technology is
board,
working so great, and here I am. I'm shooting it, to quote The Office. Right,
or the values that tend towards lower socioeconomic performance will endure for generations. In short, if you import the third world, you get third worldification.
Ooh,
This is
wow.
not far-right rhetoric.
Yes,
This
it
is
Yes, it is.
statistical fact.
No, it's not.
There's every reason to believe that the importation of tens of millions through the southern border will create a socioeconomic underclass that will over time shape our institutions into those of their ancestral lands, the same institutions they're fleeing from. That is into ethnic privileging, corruption, procedural dysfunction, and most importantly, the utter failure to serve the actual common good.
Okay. So what he's doing here is he's drawing on a book by Garrett Jones called The Culture Transplant. And that book puts forward 2 basic theses. One is that you can predict, or there's a correlation between the economic productivity of a people and the state of that people's ancestor culture as of the year 1500. Okay. So he's claiming that people basically are economically productive in relation to how developed their culture was 500 years ago. Right. And he thinks that this shows that culture actually does hang around for a long period of time, cultural dispositions and such. And he argues that people take their cultures with them when they migrate someplace. So people bring with them the economic productivity of the culture that their ancestors lived in 1,500 years ago. Now, this is it was a big book. It's made a lot of waves. It's made a lot of controversy. There's a lot of arguments about it. One of them has to do with the fact that it doesn't predict, his model doesn't actually predict what happened in 3 countries, in China, in India, and in the United States. Now, The problem with not predicting in those three cases is that those are the three largest countries in the world, and his model was
Right.
off with regard to each one of them.
As
The
far as like
United
the outcome,
States,
is that correct?
yeah, the United States overperforms in comparison to how it should, according to his model. And India and China have underperformed. Because if you go back 500 years, India and China were very developed countries, but they obviously faced problems. Now, what could those have been? Like the communist revolution in China maybe made a difference, right? What has made the United States more productive than it should have been according to his model? Well, maybe slave labor, right? Which also raises another problem for this model. What culture are we attributing to Black Americans, right? Because they have what is basically a cultural apocalypse in their history, which is brought about by slave trade. Right. So how are we
Don't
supposed
worry
to
though,
make
Kevin.
sense?
As Joel said earlier, they were bought. They weren't stolen.
Yeah.
Oh my God. What a
well,
stupid ass
and
take.
as Wolfe is doing, he just
Jeez
ignores
Louise.
the entire thing.
Yeah,
And so
jeez.
so, you know, we
my
have
God.
this question. Now, ironically, he's using this to argue for a complete close to immigration, because that's Wolfe's position, is that we should close off immigration. If you actually follow Jones's conclusion, we should actually be open to immigration from China and India, because those people, as of 500 years ago, were from advanced cultures, and they should bring those cultural habits with them, right?
Yeah.
So they should actually improve our status. He can't come to that conclusion, even though that's where the data leads that he's citing, because he would have to be for like immigration at that point.
Right.
But I think it also provides a bigger problem for his argument, which is this: he wants to ignore the status and the problem of Black culture, and that many of the problems of Black culture were caused by the history of white oppression of Black people, right? If it's the case that people carry cultural traditions over 4, 5, 6 generations out to 500 years, right? Then for how long should white people be trying to make right what they messed up in Black culture? That actually makes a pretty good argument for white people, you know, having affirmative action and having targeted spending in our, which of course is not the conclusion he wants to draw from it, but the data, if you're going to use it that way, leads to that conclusion.
That's a very powerful point. So, friends, just to sum this part up, essentially what you're saying, Kevin, is that if we're looking at 400 plus years, right, of slavery and Jim Crow, etc., it's going to take a few generations by their own admission, because, you know, generations can, things get passed on generation to generation, 4 or 5 or 6 generations later. So if that's the case, if white people, or however you want to, colonizers, whatever, did that for hundreds of years, it's going to take more than, 1 or 2 generations or a few court cases to undo, right, the damage that is going to have a ripple effect from generation to generation. And this is actually very interesting, because as I've been learning and working on my own decolonization and just trying to think about things a little bit differently from a different vantage point, one thing that I have not realized is that, ancestry is a really important part of this that me as a white person, I'm just not super connected to, because I have a grandma and grandpa, they all passed away, and that's about as far as I go. But I've noticed, I'm being broad here, but from a lot of friends that I have in the Black community, et cetera, they're like, no, you don't understand. We have legacies of this stuff, and we're very much aware of how that translates almost inherently, that trauma, that fear, whatever it is almost hereditary because of all the damage that was done to our ancestors. In fact, again, not to plug it too much, but my upcoming interview with Lisa Sharon Harper talks a lot about that, because she wrote a book called Fortune, where she found out that she is the descendant, like her earlier descendants were actually enslaved people in America, and how she navigates that part of knowing that's part of her lineage today. So I think that is a really key point to point out. Lastly, I want to say, friends, thank you for all the super chats, because we did it. We got another $10 from Elizabeth. So thank you so much. That really means the world. And like I said many times now, all super chats will get split between TNE and Kevin for his time. Yeah, Kevin, really good mic drop point. I appreciate you calling that out. Okay, shall we keep going?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So let's bring this down to earth a little bit. The most beloved of American cultural practices, one that you may not know sets us apart from much of the world, is the American culture of smiling and of acknowledging the passerby and strangers. Do you know that we're weird? People think they make fun of us for that. That pleasantry makes the public pleasant. It makes a livable and welcoming space. It feels like a duty to us. You see a stranger, you cross by, you acknowledge him, especially in the South. What Edmund Burke once called the decent drapery of life that beautify and soften society will be dissolved, making the public a space of cold and gray utility.
Okay.
Now,
this is
that true?
People are going to, if we keep immigration going, people are going to stop smiling. That's the absurdity that this speech has gotten to at this point.
Let me just tell you now that in New Jersey, we don't smile already. Like we don't, I don't talk to people online. I don't talk to my server beyond just ordering. Like we already don't do this.
Right. The irony, this guy's in favor of recovering our Puritan culture, by the way, which was not big on smiling. Yeah. But he's worried that, Hispanic people are going to come in, and Hispanic people never smile. This is just absurd. I mean, it's a self-caricature at this point. How can you say anything more than the way that it makes fun of itself?
Let's keep going.
Most Westerners, at least implicitly, know this from experience, and they can access these studies. But at the same time, we have this Western, what other people have called Western ethnomasochism. Western ethnomasochism, which I'll define as the perverse thrill in experiencing cultural suicide. The perverse thrill in experiencing cultural suicide. This is radically new and is exclusive to our time. It would be utterly incommunicable to our forefathers, the degree that we do this. And guilt, it seems to me that guilt is the crucial factor in our weirdness. But it's not the sole factor. Guilt interacts with Western universalism and egalitarianism, the same traits that have produced our prosperity. But this proves to be a suicidal admixture. Westerners tend to think that they live in universal space, a purely human place, fit and suitable for all. We think that the capitalist system is not undergirded by strong cultural norms, that bureaucracy is a matter of universal reason and rationalization, that everyone has the same rights, which are easily taught and received, and everyone is equal and free. It's a human space, not dependent on a common way of life to function and endure. Thus, many ways of life can and should equally flourish, so we adamantly affirm, against really all experience. But guilt arises when these conditions produce disparities of outcomes. In response, we don't wake from our ideological slumber. We don't realize that the conditions for flourishing are not universal, but undergirded by a particular way of life, of a particular people. No, we blame ourselves for not establishing the universal, for not yet rooting out the implicit biases and our implicit supremacy in the system. So we utilize guilt to cope with the failure of our ideology to successfully universalize outcomes. Again, we are our own in-group's out-group. And instead of rejecting this ideology or recognizing that our way of life is what undergirds our system, that is, instead of affirming our in-group, our true in-group, our guilt causes us.
Okay.
So that's a really important thing that he just slipped and said. Which he said, so these white people, instead of recognizing their in-group, their true in-group, right? Yes. Now, their true in-group is not the universal for him. Their true in-group is white people. And that's important given how he defined in-group at the beginning of this talk, right?
Yes.
He said an in-group consists of those to whom you direct your affections, your thoughts, and your principal actions for their good.
Yeah.
And he believes that the true in-group for white people should be white people.
Yep.
That white people should be directing their affections, their thoughts, and their actions for the good of white people. Now, that is completely contradicting what he's claiming are the values that he's putting forward, right? This universalism and altruism.
Right.
But he doesn't, he just, either he can't put it together or he doesn't want to admit it, right? That's where his position leads. So 100%. I think that's a very telling moment when he actually acknowledges that white people, the true in-group for white people, should be white people, according to him. Okay.
Good point.
To reaffirm the universalist and radically egalitarian ideology, to double down. In psychological terms, guilt suppresses the cognitive dissonance between our ideology and our experience.
Right. Okay, so he's given a psychological account of how you and I are confused. Why? What's leading us to suppress our cognitive dissonance and, apparently villainize ourselves in this conversation? So he says, okay, we believe that we live in a universal society where all cultures should be able to practice their own way and there should be no centralized unifying culture. And he says, and we believe that that should work and that everybody should advance that way. But inevitably, when we allow everybody to live by their own cultures, some of them fall behind because their cultures are not as good as the cultures of other people, right? And then, since we see that there's inequality as an outcome of our affirming of all cultures, we then feel guilty about it, and we sacrifice our own culture, the one thing that is actually better than what everybody else has. Right. We villainize our own culture because we feel guilty about inequality. Now, that is a brilliant set of bullshit, because what it does is it suggests that the fundamental problem leading to inequality in Western society is multiculturalism.
Right.
And not, say, a history of racism. Right? That black people, if black people are economically unable to get ahead, well, that's simply because their culture is not as good as white Anglo-Saxon culture.
That's right.
Right? The fact that they were enslaved is irrelevant. Again, it doesn't play a role in any of this. So,
or segregation, or redlining, or public school systems, etc. Funding.
Right. Yeah. So if you get rid of racism and that entire history, then the questioning of the superiority of white people will look irrational. But that's because you're not actually paying attention to history and what happened. I mean, he suggests that it is the progressive here that is, subordinating their irrationality. They're letting their feelings take over. But his narrative requires ignoring, like, most of American history. And how he's suppressing that, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have a psychological account of how he's doing that. He is very good at it.
No, definitely. I don't want to opine too much because I know this live is going to go long and we still have quite a bit to get through. So I'm just going to say I totally agree. I think it's a great point. And by the way, I mean, friends, you can hear this in a different way. A lot of times in right-wing media, when you hear, about like, well, we don't want, this whole idea of equal outcomes, is not what is possible and etc. What they're saying is that essentially, like, the reason why certain people groups are at a disadvantage is because of their cultural background not being as superior or as good as the white culture. I mean, that's what they're getting to, period. I mean, they just are. Because think about your other option. Like, what other option could it be, right? I mean, it's either there's systems or there's boundaries that have affected certain people differently than others that have allowed some people to get ahead over others, or some people are just inferior culturally to people like us. I mean, it's one of those two paths, And I appreciate you kind of calling
really
that out.
strangely, like if we were to follow that logic, we should all actually become Chinese, right? In culture, given the function of Chinese people on standardized tests, on
Right.
regardless of these mechanisms, he's of course not advocating for that, because he's not really following the data any place. He's finding data that supports his white Anglo-Saxon nationalism.
100%, totally agree. All right, let's keep going. Don't worry, friends. This will be saved to YouTube right away. It will be out on our podcast the following week, so there definitely will be a replay of this. I know that's a long stream, but I'm glad that you're all here. I love going live with people. It's so much more fun, frankly, and engaging. Let's keep going.
For this reason, multiculturalism, among other destructive and delusional policies, continue.
There it
But
is.
the final resolution of this purification spiral is complete dispossession. What begins with dispossessed hearts will end with dispossessed bodies. Universalism and guilt together shape the way we morally evaluate ourselves and others. At the group level, you may ascribe to white people only negative qualities, but you may ascribe to non-whites only positive qualities. Now, any negative qualities found among non-white folks in terms of patterns and averages must be redirected and blamed on whites. And we take on the guilt for their moral crimes. That is, we blame ourselves. Their sins, we might say, are imputed to us, reckoned to ourselves, and we take them on willingly. We wound ourselves for their transgressions. Of course, this is all quite absurd when aired out in the open, but isn't this precisely what we find in public life?
Okay, again, when describing the position that he hates, right, that he thinks gets everything wrong, that's when he uses Christian language, right?
Right.
And again, I don't think white people actually do this,
right.
But it's just amazing to me that when he engages Christian language, it's always to describe a position that he can't stand, and that is just
unreal. Yeah,
amazing for a guy who claims to be a Christian nationalist.
I totally agree. All right, here we go.
So take the sex crimes in Europe, for example. They've soared following recent immigration from the Middle East and Africa. In Sweden, nearly half of those convicted of rape were born outside of the country.
All right.
Okay. So first, that is a little bit of a skewed data point because it uses the number convicted for rape as opposed to reported for rape. And people are more likely to carry a case through to conviction if it's a foreigner than if it's a person that they know, etc. So it'll be more likely that gets picked up. But I don't want to deny that there are problems of sexual violence in Europe that involve immigrants, right? This, however, it's not clear that it's primarily an immigration or a culture problem as much as it is a problem about young males. So the people who immigrate into Europe from the Middle East are disproportionately young men, in part because of the dangers of women trying to escape from the Middle East, move across, and make it into Europe, right? So you end up with a large number of young males that are in the society that don't have partners, don't have ways of linking up. And at that point, what you actually, if we were to take a parallel, another case where it's not, say, Middle Eastern immigrants coming into Europe, but Americans coming into, say, Korea during the Korean War, right? There also we have a large influx of young men without partners that go into, right? And what happens in that case? Well, Americans pump something like $330,000 into the prostitution industry in Korea. Right? So what you have in the case of sexual violence in Europe actually isn't necessarily an immigration problem so much as it is a young men problem. And it might be partially addressed by making it easier for females to immigrate from other parts of the world. Right? So again, he's using this as a kind of point against immigration, against foreigners, but it's not a distinctive problem of foreign countries or simply a product of different gender relations in other countries. Those might be involved, but it's an oversimplification to suggest that's at the root of the problem.
Well, in this context, he's trying to enforce the point that some cultures are more superior to others, right? So those in the Middle East, those men have lower moral standards or whatever compared to us, Westerners or Europeans. But you just pointed out how well when Americans flooded South Korea, there was a huge spike there. So is that a cultural disparity, or is it really a human problem, right? Like a part of the human condition that is incredibly problematic, as opposed to, well, no, us American men would never do something like that. Only those brown-skinned immigrants would do something like that. That's kind of the vibe, is what he's trying to correlate, essentially.
Right. And it picks up on just old racist tropes about the black man who is sexually violent and abusive of the white woman, right? It plays exactly into that stereotype that already exists. And so he's just repeating it here.
Makes sense.
Recently, a German woman, Marie Theresa Kaiser, was convicted and fined 6,000 euros in a German court for, quote, inciting hatred. What did she do? She posted on social media the statistically established fact that Afghanis in Germany are heavily involved in gang rape. So if you post facts about protected groups, you must pay the price.
Okay, so
any data on this? What did she talk? What's going on here?
So Marie Therese Kaiser, the part that he leaves out, is an advocate for and a politician for right-wing, anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner politics in Germany. She's a supporter of some kind of neo-Nazi groups. What actually happened was the governor of Hamburg, the head of Hamburg, mayor, I guess, of Hamburg, had been advocating for the resettling of Afghan refugees after the Afghan war. And she said in a post that he was in favor of gang rape, and then posted this data about sexual violence in Germany. Now, in the United States, that would be protected free speech. But Germany has some fairly strict laws about slandering foreigners, slandering people on the basis of ethnicity. I can't imagine why Germany would have strict laws about slandering people on the basis of ethnicity.
Nothing in their history would ever give me that. Why would they ever think about that?
Again, if you remove the Holocaust from history, yes, this seems kind of absurd. But in context, there are reasons why Germans are very sensitive about right-wing ethnic racial groups and advocating for those positions. He's just leaving that context entirely out.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, I kind of find this to be the case for a lot of these people, where they'll pick up like sensational situations that they can leave context out to spin a narrative that technically isn't false. Like, I guess you could make that argument, but the context makes a lot more sense, right? It wasn't the fact that she said, "Hey, I did some research and I'm concerned about this. Like, how do we handle it? Here's the data I found." And the government's like, "Oh, how could you ever do that?" No, it was happening in a completely different context that was essentially being used to not only disparage people in political power, but also certain types of immigrants, broadly speaking, right? So, and again, given Germany's history, it makes sense why their laws might be way more strict and frankly just different than how we think about speech here in America. It's not a problem, So, okay. Well, keep it going, friends. Thanks for being here. So glad you're here. Let's see.
All this comes after the infamous Rotherham child sexual exploitation scandal, in which Pakistanis in England from the 1980s to 2013 assaulted thousands of teenage white British girls. The local authorities knew about it for decades, stretching back to the 80s, and they did almost nothing, fearing charges of racism. A report in 2022 says this: there's institutional hesitancy to intervene and take the necessary action to protect children and catch perpetrators. Now, has the UK learned its lesson? Around 83,000 Pakistanis immigrated legally to the UK in 2023. Has Europe learned its lesson? No, mass migration continues. Even among the so-called far-right leaders in Italy, it still continues.
All right.
Okay, so first of all, even among those far-right leaders in Italy, realize that Italy currently has a Nazi problem, right? So those people that he thinks are not far-right enough are the people that are doing Nazi salutes in Italy. That's really problematic.
Right.
Now, about the Rotherham exploitation, yes, this was a horrible incident that happened over multiple years. There was a Pakistani organization that basically set this up. And there were, by investigation, some of the police were worried about charges of racism. And this was among the reasons that it didn't get picked up earlier. However, also that investigation found that among the reasons that it didn't get picked up is these children were from like homeless shelters. They were generally poor. The people in the community didn't trust people who were less well off. They didn't trust the voices of young women who were telling them about what was happening, right? So there's multiple reasons that were involved in this not getting picked up. It's also just confused to think that this is a Pakistani problem.
Right.
If we want to talk about sexual abuse and institutions that participate in sexual abuse and cover it up, you might look at the Catholic Church.
You
right?
might. Or, I don't know, Indian boarding schools, anyone? Like, hello?
Yeah. This is
Right.
so it's
Right.
strange to think that the lesson that you should take from this is
Right.
that we need to close down Pakistani immigration. It is not the majority of Pakistanis that are doing this. It is not only Pakistanis that are doing this. There are no doubt important lessons that should be taken from it for police in dealing with these issues. But that's not one of them.
Yes.
So again, he's using true data, but he's just skewing it to get to the conclusion that he wants.
No, I completely agree. I mean, this is such a key point, right? Is that it's something can be true, and I see this happen in right-wing spaces all the time. Here's a classic example. They will pick up a story of maybe a queer couple who abused a child, right? That's wrong, that's bad. Then they use that to prove why all queer people are totally groomers and they should be whatever, put in prison or banned or whatever. But then those same people are mute on the example after example of pastors or other faith leaders, found of abusing children. And so what I'm trying to say is that people, no matter where they're from, who they are, no matter what group of people they're associated with, are gonna do bad things. There's a difference between someone doing a bad thing and applying that to a group versus a systemic issue that we can actually measure as like for example, with the Catholic Church, right? There was a systemic issue. We were able to see on data of like kid after kid coming out and saying, yeah, this happened to me when I was 5, when I was 10, when I was 15, and the church covered it up. And so I agree, like this, to use these examples and then paint the picture, and therefore the Pakistani culture is inferior to us Western civilized folks, especially given, by the way, the history of the doctrine of discovery from that same Catholic Church tradition, right? It is honestly laughable that someone can really think, frankly, that their own shit don't stink, right? Because it's just not the case. Your shit stinks, bro. It stinks. So anyway, okay, let's keep it going.
In multiculturalism, as I've said, anything you ascribe to minority groups as groups must be positive. It follows that if any individual does something bad, he must be considered as an individual, not representative of the minority group. This is true regardless of the obvious noticeable patterns. In contrast, the majority group in a nation, in our case whites, are treated as disparate individuals when doing good things, or we say that their deeds are like the deeds of our acts of humanity. They're either individualized or maximally universalized. Their great deeds do not represent something about their ethnic group or race, but of course any evil they do is representative of their group, even requiring all of us to stop and reflect. So as examples of this, Derek Chauvin with his knee on George Floyd requires all of us to reflect on our involvement and complicity in racism.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Daryl Brooks, you may not even know that guy's name, a black man who drove through the Waukesha Christmas parade in 2021, killing 6 white people, including 8-year-old Jackson Sparks. a boy marching with his baseball team, Brooks was simply called a lone sociopath angry at his girlfriend. Just as last Monday, a black woman outside an Ohio supermarket targeted and fatally stabbed a 3-year-old white boy, Julian Wood. Julian Wood. Next, his mother, who was also suffered injuries. The boy died in his mother's arms. A mother doing nothing but minding her own business. Will we take to the streets over it? Are we willing to notice at all, or even denounce? No, this murder is just a crazy individual representing nothing but herself. However, the very few instances of whites murdering blacks occasions our national reflection, even when they occurred decades ago. You're required to reflect on the name Emmett Till every time you hear it, a black teenager murdered in 1955. But will anyone require you to remember the name Julian Wood or Jackson Sparks or any of the tens of thousands of whites killed by blacks over the last few years, decades? No. The far-right numerous cases of blacks murdering whites causes not a stir at all. The justifiable death of a black man by cops is a national event, creating new slogans and a new civil rights hero.
Okay.
Can I just say, because the audience that's listening to this in the future on podcast can't see my face.
Yeah.
It is I didn't think this could get worse. And now there's no more like intellectual language masking this. It's just straight up racism, like blatant.
Yeah. I mean, so
wow.
His claim is that we pretend that when white people do things bad, it has to do with an institution. Whereas really, when black people do things bad, it has to do with them being black, right? So white people, they should be able to get off because they're just individuals. He's saying we should turn this around, right? And then the examples that he gives completely don't fit that claim.
At all.
Right? So
At all.
Derek Chauvin was a police officer, a member of an institution that is caught up in institutional racism, right?
Yes.
And he held his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes while the guy said he couldn't breathe.
Yes.
He says a justifiable act. Well, a jury disagrees with him. Right. This is not a claim. This is simply a claim that's made by a person who's making the judgment on the basis of that he likes white cops. There's no other basis for it than that. Right. It's not a basis in law. It's not a basis in fact. Right. And then he cites Emmett Till, a person who was literally lynched by whites acting in consort. Right. Both of those are attributed to whites or have concerns with white people because they tie into institutions and institutional racism. Yes. But take his two examples of black people, right? Darrell Brooks, who ran his truck through a parade. This is a guy with a history of mental problems who had just had a fight with his girlfriend, which was one of a series of domestic disturbances that he had been involved in, right? And was driving off and did a horrible thing.
Terrible,
right?
horrible. Absolutely, not a question.
What does that have to do with him being black? I can't discern anything. He says that this is an obvious pattern, that this is, has to do with him being black. I can't discern a darn thing about it.
By the way, I looked into this court case actually recently for something else. They found nothing about racial motivation behind what he did. Like, it's nowhere in the court case at all. I mean, he was, and I'm not downplaying it, but he obviously mentally out of his mind, which he should be still held accountable for, of course. What he did was terrible. But to make it seem like it was a black on white crime or something, or a racist crime, is absolutely insane.
Yeah, same thing with the other example. Bianca Ellis, right, stabs this 3-year-old, Julian Woods, and then tries to grab the baby as she leaves the scene, which this just doesn't make any sense rationally from the very beginning. Right. Again, a person who has had mental health problems in the past, there doesn't seem to be anything about race involved in it, right? So No, we're not attributing some of these to institutions and others to individuals because of racial bias.
Right.
We're doing that because of the facts of the case.
Right.
And again, if these are the best examples that you can come up with,
Right.
you have a really horrible argument.
Right.
I mean, that's you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for anything.
Two things here. Number one, I do want to point this up. I bring this up because I want people to see how mainstream this thinking actually is. It's not as fringe as you think. Look at what Ali, if you guys can see this, Ali Stuckey, this is kind of a small thing. I'll read it out loud if you can't see it. Ali Stuckey, about Darrell Brooks, tweeted this. October 26, 2022. Quote, Darrell Brooks was a documented black supremacist who targeted and murdered 6 white people, including an 8-year-old boy named Jackson. Yet 0 news outlets have covered the story for what it is. So there you go. Again, you see the jump, friends, that I'm trying to demonstrate to you. You might be watching this live or listening to the podcast. Maybe you're more conservative than me. Maybe you think that we're exaggerating. Do you not understand that, like, this ideology, this way of thinking about the world is embedded in the minds of right-wing commentators with millions of followers? I mean, Ali Stuckey, as of this recording, in 3 months from now, in September, is doing an event with Elisa Childers, a white evangelical apologist, and Rosaria Butterfield, talking about how we have to share the arrows that our enemies lob at us. This is how Ali thinks. She thinks like Stephen Wolfe does. So we have to understand when I say that racism is embedded in white evangelicalism or in the right wing, this is a great example of what we're talking about. I also noticed, by the way, that he did not mention Ahmaud Arbery, because the jury found that both of those men, actually all 3 of them, were actual racists. They actually were motivated by their racial hatred for Ahmaud. Yet that story doesn't make it into his monologue, does it? No, it doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't. Man, it's so infuriating watching these people pick up random anecdotal horrible tragedies. I don't want to minimize that a family today is missing their 8-year-old and a mother's missing her 3-year-old. Like that, man, I want to cry thinking about that. I'm a father. I get that. But to take tragedy like that and say, and therefore, black people are just targeting whites and no one's talking about it, is literally how fucking propaganda works. And it gets me so angry to see them use this stuff and twist it in ways that commit so much more harm. It drives me bonkers. Mm-hmm. That's why I said fuck, because I was angry. Okay, we'll keep going.
The Western civilizational ethos can be characterized by maximal openness to outsiders. Our civilization being nothing distinctive in itself, but a universal human space for any and all outside of it. And we as Westerners, as those who must embody this ethos, must likewise be radically open, to the point of being nothing distinctive in ourselves, having nothing of ourselves to self-affirm, be proud of, to recognize as uniquely ours. So great is the Western malaise that we are great only insofar that they become great. We must decrease that they might increase. Our only good is doing good to the non-Westerner. And so our confidence, our self-worth, our meaning is tied up with those extra nos outside us. We live vicariously through the self-affirmation and the confidence of the other. In this sense, we are dependent on the non-Westerner to be good, on our self-assurance and confidence. We live through them. When humans have nothing of and for themselves, they find it from others. This is the function of the great white gaze, is a desperate and pathetic attempt to feel human.
Wow.
Okay, so again,
Kevin.
Again, he drops a Bible verse when describing the position that he hates, right? I mean, I hear echoes in here of like 1 Corinthians 4:10, talking about we have become like the rubbish of the world, the dregs of all things until today. Paul's talking about how the Christian is supposed to inhabit the world, right? The idea of being for the other seems pretty basic to Christianity. And he even cites, right, from John 3:30-35, I must decrease that they might increase. That's actually about like Jesus and the Holy Spirit. But why does he only use Bible verses when he's describing a position that he hates? this is just mind-boggling, and that there are ostensibly Christians in the audience that are not recognizing that this is a problem. Is just, I don't know. It's amazing to me.
Well, what kills me is that these people, these men, are sitting around at this event put on by New Christendom Press, pretending that somehow they're intellectuals. Somehow, like, they just have it all figured out. They understand the Bible, and they understand how humans, civilization works, and the importance of maintaining Western civilization because of its supremacy. It's like, you're actually so anti-intellectual, and you're so ignorant, but you're so arrogant and prideful, you think you actually know what you're talking about. And you don't. Yeah. I mean, I guess you do in the sense of you're doing a great job participating in the generations of supremacists who have come before you. So I guess, applause for that. But, like, you're so backwards in how you're thinking. It is shocking that you just don't, that maybe it's not shocking, but it shocks me that they don't see it.
Yeah. I mean, you just think about his claim there at the end that a person who has nothing for himself must find the good of himself in the other. And it's like, hold on, if you go to an evangelical church on a Sunday morning, won't they tell you that you should realize that you have nothing for yourself, and so you must find yourself in the good that is God, in
100%.
Jesus, right?
100%.
But here, it doesn't register to him. This is, and he says it's a pathetic attempt to be human. And I'm just like, I do not get that your own position is incoherent at that point. It's just mind-boggling.
Kip says, biblical scholar here, Reformed theologians tend to make the worst textual specialists and exegetes. I agree. Friends, Kip, I'm not sure if you're kind of coming in and out of the live. Cool if you are. But I shouted out your channel earlier. I recommend friends checking out Kip's channel. He has some great people on there often, including friends of mine like Dr. Jennifer Bird, a great New Testament biblical scholar who actually I just had on the podcast last week talking about IVF. Kip, if you want to put your channel or a link or something in the chat, feel free. You're doing great work on topics of like slavery in the Bible, so I recommend that. But the more, I'm not an academic or a biblical scholar, to be very clear, but the more I do this work and get the privilege of talking to folks like you, Kevin, and other folks who are in this world, the more I'm like, yeah, you're right. This isn't really adding up. These are really bad takes. So, all right, listen, I know time is getting short. Let's keep it going. Let's get through this. Appreciate you all being here. Remember, we are splitting all super chats with Kevin, so bring them in. Let's give Kevin a good send-off for doing all the work and research to make this happen. Here we go.
But let's focus back on America. Okay, the post-World War II order brought in a new history of America, one that emphasized the U.S. as a nation of immigrants, a nation for any and all who will affirm the liberal propositions. But this narrative is false. The post-war period is an era of myth creation, the never again ethos, which rose to dominate after the aftermath of World War II, required that the political left and right affirm a new narrative of American history. In the U.S., this story is centered in part around two seemingly contradictory ideas: that the American political tradition is racist or contains racism, and is marked by radical openness.
Wow.
Okay. So
wow.
This is okay. There is again, as I said earlier, there is some truth to the idea that the nation of immigrants is a myth. And there's a reason why after World War II, we would have emphasized this myth. And it's because we were just at war with Nazi Germany, right? And we had been a deeply racist, deeply anti-Semitic nation prior to World War II, yet now we were defining ourselves against Nazism. Right. And for the most part, I think that's a good thing.
Right.
Like defining ourselves against Nazism and leading that to make us define ourselves against our own past racism and anti-Semitism was a good thing. What's weird is that in his narrative, this is a fall from grace, right? This is a place where we went wrong. And that is just, it's amazing to me.
I agree. By the way, friends, if you're looking for a good resource on this, I just finished this 6-part series on Netflix called Hitler that really documents the early rise of the Nazi regime way before World War II and goes into World War II. It's really worth watching. I'll just put it that way. And then I think that will give more context of why, to your point, our views of immigration and that stuff really shifted, because we saw the damage and I want to be careful here because I don't know Stephen's heart. That's a kind of an evangelical nod, but I will just put it this way. And Kevin, if you think I'm being hyperbolic, you can correct me, like as always. But the rhetoric that he's participating in here, you can find a lot of similarities to how Hitler thought about people like the Jews early on, especially when he documents his time in Vienna, etc. Again, I'm not saying that Stephen wants to commit the same level of atrocity of what Hitler did, but a lot of the same views of the world and the supremacy nature and culture stuff, it is eerily similar when you start looking into some of that history. And we have to be so aware of that, because if there's one thing that is true, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And I'm afraid that we're kind of slowly coming back around when people like Candace Owens have millions of followers who are promoting, maybe the Holocaust was kind of exaggerated, friends, or when former presidents are on the campaign trail saying that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country, which is the same rhetoric that Hitler employed in some of his own writings and speeches. Again, that's not being extreme or hyperbolic. It's just reading the room and saying, yikes, we should be concerned about where this rhetoric can lead, because we've been here before as a people in history. So I just want to point that out, as best as I can without sounding too extreme. But man, like the more you read history, especially during World War II, the more you're like, yikes, dude, this goes somewhere. This leads somewhere. So, okay, sorry, I'm off my soapbox now.
White heterosexual man. His intersection of characteristics renders him the villain in every case of oppression in American history. And this is his only distinctive identity in American history. For the WASP, as we've been called, cannot have a positive identity, nor can he claim a unique and important connection to the American Anglo-Protestants of old, such as George Washington. Washington and all great American Anglo-Protestants of our history have been universalized, and thus they have become fathers of all. We are left with no heroes to call our own. But given the oppositional nature of the historical narrative, non-Anglo-Protestants, having been the oppressed, can exclusively identify with their ancestry. So one can be proud of being Black and Hispanic and Chinese, and they can have exclusive claims to certain American heroes, for example, Martin Luther King for Blacks. But this is denied to white Protestant Americans, whose potential heroes have been either universalized or villainized. They are not allowed to have a distinct people. Again, their in-group is all people. But since their ancestors were the oppressors in American history, they are their own in-group's out-group. Thus, they are connected to their ancestry exclusively, but only as the villains of American history. The exact opposite is true of all other groups.
Oh,
okay.
Boy.
So
Jeez.
what's fascinating about this is that I think he's got it exactly backwards in terms of how this works culturally. So yes, there is a tendency to universalize white heroic figures from the past, right?
Yep.
But what that does is it doesn't get rid of their whiteness. It suggests that whiteness is the norm for the society.
Right.
I mean, this is why social studies have shown that like biases against blackness are experienced by all Americans, including Black people. It's because our media universalizes and puts as the norm those white figures from the past, right? And so when you do studies of white children, right, they tend to think beauty as associated with whiteness.
Right.
Why? Because those are the universal examples of beauty that we give. And then we have particularized examples of beauty for Black people.
That's right.
Because they can't quite be up to the standard of the white universal standard. Now, what's weird is he's redrawn this narrative as if it's anti-white, when really it's normative whiteness. I mean, it is exactly what puts the white standard on our society.
That's right.
And it's exactly why we need to emphasize people like Martin Luther King Jr. so that minorities can see examples of people that look like them that are national heroes.
That's right.
And he's just made this into a story about how white people are oppressed because the culture is stealing our heroes from us. It just doesn't fit with what is actually happening in the culture.
I mean, not to mention Oh, sorry, I cut you off there. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, or what social science shows. I mean, it's just it's a fascinating rebranding of, again, a lot of data in a way that supports a racist conclusion.
Well, it's so funny every MLK day watching all the white evangelical churches be like, oh, we love MLK, when like if these same people were born in the 70s, or 60s, they'd be like, no, he's a radical Marxist who's trying to destroy the country, right? So it's like you can even see how again, like whiteness appropriates all the time things that it hated a couple decades ago. Like you can see this all over the place, right? So I totally agree, and I think you actually gave a great example of how when we talk about this term whiteness, we're talking about exactly what you said. We're like, what is the standard, right? How do we think about beauty, and what is normalized, and what is kind of like the exception to the rule? That's what we mean by the idea of whiteness here. And I forgot who said it. This is not my idea, but I'm going to butcher the quote. But essentially, whiteness is invisible to so many people, and then but once you see it everywhere, right? And that's really the case. Like, I grew up in this world my whole life, right? I just didn't see what I couldn't see. But now that I'm getting eyes to slowly see more and more, I'm like, oh, this is actually everywhere. So that's a really important point. Also, I want to say, Michael Beverly, $100 super chat. That deserves an applause. Hey, thank you so much. Again, friends, like I said many times, we're splitting all super chats with Kevin to make sure that he gets support as a way of saying thank you for all the research he's done. Friends, please consider giving this video a like if you have not given it a like yet, because likes let YouTube know, hey, people are enjoying this video. Let's send it to more people in their recommendations, and hopefully more people come in to watch it. Okay, friends, we are almost there. I know it's been 2 hours, 15 minutes. I don't know how you live streamers do this all the time, because I see Kip's videos, sometimes they're 3 hours. I'm like, dude, how do you go my head's already hurting. So let's wrap this bad boy up. Home stretch. Let's do it. Here we go.
Now we have to recognize that the turn against the wasp is kind of a dark irony. For there's truth in the myth of American openness. Americans have always been remarkably open and welcoming relative to the rest of the world.
Okay, again, slavery? I mean, the Anglo-Americans have always been open to the foreigner. In what reality is he living that this is what history looks like? It is true that America has always been a place of immigration, largely in spite of the Anglo-Saxon opposition to that immigration and the oppression of other people. So it's a very strange thing that he has to affirm both the complete goodness of this, right, and pretend that there's never anything bad that happened. No slavery, no anti-immigration
really
sentiment,
amazing.
no racism.
I mean, read Stand from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. Like, it's a powerful read of just how deeply embedded this stuff is and how quick we forget. I mean, Stephen Wolfe, to not even acknowledge like the hundreds of years of oppression that people have caused other human beings, race-based chattel slavery being as necessary to the economy as electricity is today. It's all there. And for him to be like, oh, it's crazy that we whites are so villainized. It's
right.
Like,
we've always been open to foreigners.
Like, how about we have some goddamn humility here? It just, I want to point out one thing. This, and I've always thought this, even before I started deconstructing whatever, I always thought, at the heart of the Christian tradition is the act of repentance. When you find out that something you did, or maybe people groups that you've been a part of have done something wrong, you want to own that and say, oh my gosh, I didn't know. When I was reading books like The Bible Told Them So by J. Russell Hawkins, or Jamar Tisby's read, I'm blanking on it, my head's so spent, and other books, the New Jim Crow, it wasn't hard for me to say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that white evangelicals, my tradition, were so complicit in racism and are still kind of using these ideas now. I want to repent and go the other way. I didn't feel super guilty in the sense of like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person, but I felt an obligation as a Christ follower to do the work of liberating the oppressed. And that started by first acknowledging my own unintentional but still complicity in these systems that have a legacy of racism. To me, this is not Marxism. It's not radical. It's like Christianity 101. This is not a crazy thought, but for Stephen, it's so interesting watching him try and claim that he's standing on the most Christian position that actually is the most antichrist in nature. It completely blows away loving your enemy, bearing a cross for your enemy, putting the other ahead of your own interests. Like, it just spits in the face of even some pretty classic evangelical teaching, let alone broader historic Christian streams. It's wild to me. Okay. Woo! Here we go.
Well, very recently, American openness was highly conditional. It required ethnic conformity. Indeed, American openness traditionally was not the toleration of radical difference, as many conceive of it today. It wasn't radical toleration, it was radical conformity. Foreigners became natives by becoming like the natives. American openness was the belief that foreigners, or at least their progeny, can assimilate into the American ethnos, namely into Anglo-Protestantism.
There it is.
Okay,
There it is.
now note, he spent a lot of the earlier part of his speech trying to convince us that foreigners cannot acclimate to a new culture, and thus we should have no immigration. And now he's going to claim that America has always been open in a way that allows you to conform. And what's the reason for this incoherence in his position? Well, he wants no immigration, but he also wants anybody who disagrees with him that is already here in the United States to conform to his perspective.
Yes.
Right? And so he's got to embrace this incoherence that foreigners can't actually accommodate themselves to our culture. That's why we shouldn't let them come. And any foreigners that are here can accommodate to my position, and so they should. 100%. Right? It's double speak, but he's got these two positions. It makes sense if you are right in a de facto multicultural condition that you want to impose this kind of race-based Anglo-Saxon culture on. So
100%. My mother just called me. That's why everyone heard that ringing. So sorry, Mom. I'm busy owning Christian nationalists on the internet live. Okay. Great observation. And don't forget, I mean, wait, I had a thought. Oh, yeah. I mean, earlier we shared a clip of Stephen Wolfe, the same guy we're looking at now, saying that, under his world of Christian nationalism in America, blasphemy is punished. He's all for blasphemy laws. The atheist is put in jail. Women don't lead. So exactly, like, it's all about everyone circling around and being assimilated into his perspective of how the world should function. All right, here we go.
Contrary to popular belief, there was an ethnic basis to American identity during the founding, which endured well after it. Well into the 20th century. There was a dominant ethnicity. Furthermore, solidarity around this unique American ethnos was necessary to maintain America's universal principles. Ethnic particularity ensured the survival of our universal principles. In other words, culture undergirded the viability of the propositions.
Okay, now note, those propositions are supposed to be for universality, equality, altruism. But at this point, the ethnicity that he's put forward doesn't actually support any of those propositions. So again, his position is just incoherent. He's claiming to support a set of principles that his own position gets rid of.
Yeah. That's good. Keep it going.
So historians, very famous historians like Alan Gelzo and Gordon Wood, they've separately argued that the Great Awakening was sort of the initial cause of a type of ethnogenesis. It was called what Eric Kaufman, as I referenced him earlier, he calls it the early stages of a British-American self-consciousness. So the Americans at the time of the founding, they considered themselves part of the British political tradition. For example, in 1774, a document called Declaration and Resolves by the Continental Congress, it sought the recognition of their rights according to the immutable laws of nature and the principles of the English Constitution. They declared their rights as Englishmen, as their ancestors in like cases have usually done for asserting and vindicating their rights and liberties.
Let's just keep going here.
Okay, you got it.
Among the founding generation and well into the 20th century, Americans affirmed a sort of Anglo-Saxonism. You don't read this in most textbooks. Of course, Anglo-Saxonism is more myth than fact, but it speaks nevertheless to the idea of an intertwining of ethnicity, ancestry, and American principles, and it was affirmed even by those who insisted on the universality of those principles.
Okay,
Eric,
so a couple of things here. Number one, the idea of an ethnogenesis at the Great Awakening, if he means an ethnogenesis as white Protestant, that's going to be complicated because the founding fathers are, members of Unitarian churches. They're deists. They're not a whole bunch of Protestants that are putting together this nation. So again, this is a mythology that he's putting forward here. The other thing that we ought to say is that you don't find Anglo-Saxonism in textbooks because we have another word for it. We call it racism. It's not a secret that anybody's trying to hide. Right. Why he's going back to the founding fathers and treating them as if they are, infallible sources.
Totally.
These were guys who were racist at points, right? And the fact that they held positions that embraced myths about ethnicity is not a reason that we should do that. So just the whole framework of argument faces some serious problems here.
100%. Again, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all.
Hoffman, who I've mentioned a few times, he argues that American Anglo-Saxonism was even similar to the romantic nationalist ideas of later in continental Europe from people like Johann Herder and Hegel and Fichte.
Okay, hold on. So he's claiming this. The romantic nationalism of the founding fathers was similar to the romantic nationalism of those people in Europe. Now, those people that he names, do you know where they're all from?
No.
Fichte, Hegel, they're all German. And yes, romantic nationalism in Germany was a big movement. And do you know where it led?
I have no idea.
I mean, the idea of a Volk, a people with a distinctive Geist, the spirit of the people, that, right? And he's just here saying, our nationalism was very similar to that of the romantic German nationalism. He doesn't use the word German. He says, continental Europe. But that's what he's talking about there, right? It's just, again, it's one of those things that if you know what you're listening to, it's like, did you really just say that? Because I think you're actually advocating for a position that's similar to Schnazism, right?
Well, think about it. I mean, Nick Fuentes gets unbanned on Twitter, now called X by Elon Musk. So he's going around there. Marjorie Taylor Greene spoke at his rally a year and a half ago, and then initially defended it before, she said, okay, no, it was a big mistake, which was like months after. Trump sat down with Nick for dinner and then claims he didn't know who Nick was, but still never apologized or disowned him. Nick Fuentes is a Holocaust-denying, openly anti-Semitic, racist, misogynist, white nationalist, right? And this guy has millions of followers and has a major audience in these right-wing spaces. And I'm pretty sure, although I can't prove this, seems like has the ear of Candace Owens based on how she's been talking, frankly. But I'm just saying, again, think about the state of the right-wing media world. Think about what is allowed. Now, to be clear, Nick is banned from events like Turning Point USA events. I know that for a fact. But honestly, my speculation, it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of time before the people like Nick and Stephen get more and more blatantly open and more accepted in this right-wing ethos of, a distinct people for a distinct purpose that, again, we can see who it's echoing. Okay.
We must, and this is very important, we must emphasize that Anglo-Protestantism is traditionally an open ethnicity. Now, this is not me being like a modern guy. This is historically true. We've always held that non-Anglo-Protestants can, over time, conform and become one of us. Dominant ethnicity is not opposed to assimilation. It is not a race essentialist ethnicity, nor something enclosed by genetic markers. People of non-British ancestry can become Anglo-Protestant culturally. Nevertheless, the openness is not an openness for radical difference. but an openness to the possibility of conformity. American openness says this is our homeland, and we welcome you on the condition of conformity.
That's right. And
Okay.
what did Stephen say earlier? Conformity looks like atheism is thrown in, atheist is put in jail, atheism is crushed, women don't lead. So this is, friends, whenever I talk about on other channels about how it's all about assimilation, that's what I'm talking about. He literally said it perfectly. Yes, no, we're open to anyone as long as you assimilate into these white supremacist views that maintain a specific social, sexual, hierarchy of who's on top and who's on bottom. As long as you find your place on that hierarchy, on that ladder, you're going to be just fine. The second you challenge it, though, you're a Marxist, you're a race baiter, you're a social. I mean, think about MLK. That perfect example. MLK was labeled all those things because he pushed back on the hierarchy that was put in place mainly by white evangelical Protestants, and it's partly why today people like Charlie Kirk and certainly I'm sure Stephen Wolfe look at MLK as in the civil rights movement as a great step backwards that was actually anti-white. And no, I'm not exaggerating. Those are claims made by people in Charlie Kirk's world at his events. So I'm just trying to help you put the pieces together to see where this is coming from and what it actually looks like.
Right. I mean, this is his big "I swear I'm not racist" moment, right? Where despite the fact, as we've noted, he shifts back and forth between culture and white throughout the talk, right? So here, when he's going to make the not racist, he's going to emphasize it's a culture. You can be assimilated to it, but realize throughout the talk what you're assimilating to. You're assimilating to those white people being the true in-group. You're assimilating to defending the place of whites in a position of power in society where there can't be targeted spending to help other people who have been oppressed. That's what you're so while he says, yeah, I mean, you can assimilate to this culture, what you're assimilating to is a culture that puts the position of whites above everybody else.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So,
and by the way, will not own the mass genocide that they commit, the mass slavery that they commit. They're not going to own that. They're going to literally, the term whitewashing exists for a reason. They will literally whitewash the reality to maintain the status quo. But I'm sorry to riff on this, but I have to. This is what colorblindness does. When people say they don't see color, they might not know this, but colorblindness was actually formed as a second kind of pushback to the anti-racism work of the 60s and 70s. When people said, well, how about we just say we don't see color? And what that does is it actually freezes the status quo in place, right? Because then once you bring up, oh, well, black people seem to be oppressed. Whoa, guys, we move past racism and seeing color. That's why this language is so detrimental. And we want to give you the eyes and the ears. So when you hear these terms, I don't see color, or when you hear things like, not all cultures are created equal, you understand what they're actually saying. They're actually loaded statements to maintain the status quo where certain people are on top, especially white men, mostly, and then women are kind of there. And then, of course, as you get down the racial hierarchy, etc., it gets lower and lower and lower on the pole.
Yeah, and in this case, he's not even saying we've overcome racism. He seems to be saying we never actually were racist, right? We dominated other cultures because our culture was better.
That's right.
And it wasn't really racism ever, right? Those people ended up as slaves because they lived in defunct cultures.
No, that's exactly right.
So I mean, that appears to be the position that he's representing, which is just so deeply troubling.
100%. We're almost there, friends.
Still, we must recognize
3 minutes.
that in general, 20th century immigration, including Ellis Island generation, has been overall bad for this country. Indeed, our sprawling bureaucracy, rooted in FDR's New Deal, came largely from the Catholic European immigrants' preference for the welfare state. As shown earlier, immigrants do not shrug off the values of their ancestral homeland on average. And those who have strong family values will still vote for welfare programs and social services over universal moral concerns like abortion and homosexual marriage. When your heart is planted elsewhere, your main concern here is for the things of the body. Foreigners, they tend to care more for the social services and the things that essentially free stuff than they would about the sort of national greatness that settled hearts would desire.
Insane. I mean,
Okay,
it's so
it's
dumb.
fascinating that care for the unborn is a universal concern. Care for the poor is not. Right? This is care for the poor. Apparently, is something that immigrants brought us. And the evil Eastern European Catholic immigrants into again going back to very 1800s rhetoric in anti-immigration stuff. That comes in, which of course also entirely ignores the reality of the social gospel, of Walter Rauschenbusch, of Hull House, of this, the whole, because he doesn't even
the early
really
Wesleyan tradition.
The social holiness tradition, because of course he doesn't even really mean white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. He means white Anglo-Saxon evangelical, right? Mostly Calvinist is what he's talking about.
That's right.
So, I mean, and this is what I meant at the beginning when I said saying that he's a white supremacist is actually thinking that he's more tolerant than he is, because there's whole groups of white people that he doesn't think that should be included in
people
this.
like us, white progressive Christians, so to speak, or however we are going to identify, are going to be totally on the chopping block here too. It's only a matter of time, that's a great point. All right, friends, home stretch. I know I've said that for a while here. We got 2 minutes left. Let's get through this and we'll wrap it up. Thanks for being here. I mean, wow, 2.5 hours in. But you know what? Frankly, this is why we do this, because it takes time to really unpack and help people understand what's actually behind all of this. So here we go.
Since Ellis Island, immigration was white immigration. The old America, the America of the old right that opposed the New Deal, is not a white thing. It's not a white thing, but is a distinctly American Anglo-Protestant thing,
which is white,
generated on these shores by a particular people. I'm not interested in white nationalism, nor limiting immigration to white people. White immigrants today will join the white Catholics in voting for Democrats. Doesn't matter where they come from. They're going to vote for the Democrats. Rather, old America lives on, albeit imperfectly, among white evangelicals who, as a voting bloc, remain the lone bulwark against the complete destruction of old America.
Wow. I mean, he just said the quiet part out loud. He just actually proved all the points that we made. Yes, white evangelicalism has been one of the greatest proponents of racism and supremacy in American history. And Stephen goes, they're our last great bulwark to protect Western civilization. Thank you. You know what? Stephen? We agree. We totally agree. Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. No, this is, it is really phenomenal that at this point he's denying being a racist because that's too broad a group. Right. I mean, because that's too many people to allow in. And again, realize those principles that he claims he's defending, universalism, egalitarianism, altruism, the things that he wants to claim are true American principles. Those are the things that evangelicals are standing for today. Right. It just, again, it flies in the face of the actual political positions taken by many evangelicals and the ways that they leave behind those ideals. And it's just an incoherent position.
It's mind-blowing. All right, let's wrap this bad boy up.
Let us further recognize that we are a Protestant people, which makes America a Protestant country.
Oh, my gosh.
And so we must act in public as Protestants again.
You can't forget that mythology.
We must be Protestant academics, Protestant politicians, Protestant ethicists, Protestant intellectuals, Protestant voters. We must restore our confident responsibility for the America that is ours. We must shrug off the Stockholm Syndrome-like admiration we have for Roman Catholic and Jewish thinkers, who themselves are minorities, actually, within the Anglo-Protestant majority, who have dominated movement conservatism, and they've predictably been unable and largely unwilling to stop the slide of progress. To make America great again, America must again become explicitly and confidently Protestant again.
I mean, for the record, it never was. Our Constitution is incredibly secular, incredibly so. Where do our rights come from? We, the people, not from God.
Yeah. And the founding fathers were not exclusively Protestant. Again, deists, universalists, like there are lots of different options there.
Wild.
This is a mythology that he's pushing. But he says, right, you can't have Jewish or Catholic figures as heads of conservatism. Why not? Because they would have to include themselves. And he doesn't want them included in the in-group that he's actually looking for, right?
Totally.
Also, he's not talking about Protestantism because he's excluding, right, the Methodist Church, the ELCA,
for sure,
the PCUSA.
Totally.
He's not. Every Christian nationalism has been narrowed to Protestant nationalism, which has been narrowed to white evangelical nationalism, which is narrowed to white nationalism. I mean, this Anglo-Saxon white nationalism. Right?
I really appreciate Stephen just saying, I mean, he's really validating all of our critiques. I mean, I've been calling this out, so have you, so have many others, for a couple of years now. And Stephen's like, yes, that's right. We will own all of it. That's right. We want a specifically and distinctly Protestant nation. By that, we mean a white evangelical nation primarily. And by that, we mean an Anglo-Saxon nation. And by that, we mean white people at top and everyone else, people like us at the top and anyone else who will assimilate at the bottom. It's like, thank you for just saying it all.
Part of the problem of critiquing it is that we don't have words for this narrow of a view, right? Because even white supremacy is too broad for this kind of position. We don't even have a name for it.
It's a great point. No, it's a great point. Okay, let's the last clip. I think it's a minute long, and then we're done. Woo, wow. I mean, pat yourself on the back. What a marathon.
So let me conclude with scripture.
What's up?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Go.
Revelation 7:9. After this, I beheld, and lo, a great multitude which no man could number, of all nations, kindreds, and peoples and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. So let me ask you a question. You, brother or sister, are in that multitude. Whom are you standing next to? Have you ever asked yourself that question before? Which nation of that great multitude are you among in that verse? But let me tell you whom I'm standing next to.
Oh, tell us.
I'm standing next to John Winthrop, Cotton Mather. I'm standing next to Jonathan Edwards. I'm next to John Jay, John Witherspoon, and George Washington. I'm next to Benjamin Warfield, Stonewall Jackson, and Calvin Coolidge. I'm next to Santiago Pliego, Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas, and Chocolate Knox. And finally, I'm next to Billy Graham, Jimmy Stewart, and R.C. Sproul. These are my people.
R.C. Sproul.
So who are yours? Thank you.
Okay, let's note, this is the only time in the entire speech where he uses something Christian to support his position, and he reads the Bible entirely wrong when he goes there.
I mean, completely.
Because
I'm not a biblical scholar like Kip is, or you,
No.
but I know that's batshit crazy.
No, Revelation 7:9 says there is one multitude from all nations that stands before God. One multitude from all nations. He reads that as there are a bunch of nations standing separate from each other in front of God.
Right.
He assumes that the people will be next to members of their ethnicity, right? Their ethnic group, and separate from other Christians of other ethnic groups. That's exactly the opposite of the point that is happening in the Bible, where there is one multitude taken from all of the ethnoi, right? It's phenomenal.
I know I'm laughing over you. I'm sorry. I'm just so exhausted from this stupid live because it's so intense that to have Stephen really pretend that he's some actual scholar and intellectual so blatantly misread like the most obvious sentence maybe in Revelation. I have to crack up. I have to laugh. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is, there are places that you could get a kind of ethnocentrism in the Bible, mostly from places in the Old Testament.
Sure.
It is really hard when you get to the New Testament. The whole "there is no Jew nor Greek" thing pretty much makes the New Testament a difficult place to get nationalism from. And so in order to do it, you're going to have to entirely misread it, just as he does here, and then turn it into this schmaltzy, who am I going to be standing next
Stonewall
to?
Jackson, slave owners. Congratulations.
Stonewall Jackson. Yeah.
Confederate generals. Guys, I want you to know that in heaven, I'm standing next to the slave owners who were so adamant about slavery, they fought a civil war over it. Those are my people. Like, congratulations, Stephen. Like, really good. Thank you. Like, wow.
That is
so brave.
actually the closest that he's come to acknowledging that slavery existed in the entire thing. Is acknowledging that he will be standing next to Stonewall Jackson.
We have a very strict policy of non-dehumanization here, and I will say it has taken a lot for me not to just be so dehumanizing to this person, because it's laughable. Like, these people think that they are standing on a firm foundation, that they are standing on some kind of quote unquote biblical idea. I mean, maybe RJ Rushdoony would love this ideology, but I'm saying it's bad on every level. It's a bad reading of data. It's a bad reading of cultures and how they function. It's a bad reading of specific Bible verses. And they sit there with their smugness, having their little stupid events, the new Christendom, where, and they really think like the goal of our life is to take over the country and put people underneath our foot in the name of God. It's like, no, we will fucking resist you every step of the way. Like, I don't know if these people understand how completely opposed not only I am, but millions of people are to this way of thinking, and why we will do everything we can absolutely do within our power to resist and to make sure that they have no access to political or cultural power to get this done, because it will destroy the lives of so many of our neighbors, many of which are already so marginalized. And I'm no Bible scholar, but when I read liberate the oppressed, or feed the poor, take care of the sick, clothe the naked, love your enemies, blessed are the meek, for they'll inherit the kingdom, they'll inherit the earth. I go, yeah, this seems pretty antithetical to whatever the hell Stephen Wolfe is preaching. And so I feel like, especially if you're out there listening to this and you're a Christian, you have an obligation as a Jesus follower to do everything you can to make sure, for the sake of your neighbors, divesting your own privilege and power, that this shit does not see the light of day in terms of our political and cultural moment. Because, my God, it is so freaking dangerous.
Yeah. I do think that, as a scholar, I recognize that the Bible can be read, right? You can take different parts of it and come up with very different positions. There's lots of different, but this is literally a position where, in order to get to it, you have to misread things. You in order to come up with this being Christian nationalism, you're going to have to make moves like he does in this last bit, where you're going to have to read things out of context against what they have meant in their original context or the context of the broad Christian tradition, right? 100%. And it's just, it's scary that it's out there. It's scary that these people actually have political power, and it's disturbing. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in today. But
all the more reason to resist. And also to offer a better alternative, right? A better path forward. We say this often from our standpoint. A better path forward in our faith is the key. People have and will continue to use the Bible either as a weapon of oppression or a tool for liberation, right? We have the choice here. Because we know this, so it's important that we really think about what are we actually advocating for from our religious tradition. That's so important. Kevin, you've been with me now for almost 3 hours. That's longer than my wife has seen me all day. It's almost dinner time. So I really appreciate you coming on. I know that people probably are tuning in maybe now. Can you just plug all of your channels again so folks can follow you?
Yeah. So mostly I am over on TikTok. Just search for Kevin Carnahan. I come up. I am a professor at Central Methodist University, but you can't plug in there unless you're going to come and pay tuition. So mostly at TikTok these days.
Awesome. I love it. Kevin, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I'll see you back on the live in a few weeks for something else to go through. Friends, again, thank you so much for being here. It means the world. Like I said earlier, we are a nonprofit organization. I'm able to do this work and bring on amazing guests like Kevin because of your generosity, whether it's a super chat, which again, we're splitting all super chats with Kevin, or a donation to our organization. It all helps make this work completely accessible, 100% paywall free, and open to all. I would love your thoughts if you're watching this on YouTube in the comments. Please make sure to give this video a like. If you're listening on podcast, hello. Thanks for tuning in for almost 3 hours. Would love your thoughts. Shoot me an email. Friends, I'll talk to you all soon. Woo! I need more coffee. See ya.